Welcome to this story, where the gentle rhythm of nature and the steady footsteps of a herdsman guide us through tranquil hills under the vast, starry sky. Imagine yourself walking beside him, immersed in the peaceful sounds of the night, the soft crunch of grass beneath your feet, the quiet rustling of leaves, and the distant calls of night creatures. As the herdsman tends to his flock, every step is deliberate and calm, a reflection of his deep connection to the land. With each passing moment, you feel your body relax and your mind drift closer to sleep, carried by the soothing cadence of the journey. This is a world without hurry, where time moves slowly and nature's beauty brings peace to your spirit. Each step along the path offers a moment of quiet reflection and serenity, guiding you gently into a restful, healing slumber. If you find comfort in this tranquil journey, consider subscribing to our channel for more peaceful stories to help you unwind. The night was calm, with the moon hanging low over the hills, casting a soft, silvery glow that bathed the land in a tranquil light. A solitary figure, the herdsman, moved along the winding path with a quiet, deliberate pace, his steps steady and unhurried, his presence a calm contrast to the vast, still landscape around him. The sound of the soft padding of sheep hooves against the earth blended seamlessly with the rustling of the leaves overhead, their whispers stirred by the gentle evening breeze. The air was cool, filled with the earthy scent of dew-covered grass, and the faint fragrance of wildflowers folding their petals for the night. Above, the sky stretched out endlessly, a vast canopy of stars, their light faint but constant, like distant beacons in the endless black expanse. The herdsman's eyes, steady and thoughtful, reflected the calm wisdom of a life lived in harmony with the land, a quiet understanding that came from years of walking these same paths, guiding the same flock. He glanced now and then at the sheep, his steady gaze reassuring, keeping them safe as they followed behind him, their bleats soft and calm in the stillness of the night. The hills rolled gently around them, their outlines softened by the moonlight, casting long shadows that danced lightly in the breeze. The herdsman's movements were slow but purposeful, each step part of the rhythm that had been established. Over countless nights spent walking the same route, the path, winding and narrow, led them upward, the air growing crisper as they ascended. With every step, the herdsman felt more attuned to the landscape around him, the steady rhythm of his footsteps matching the natural cadence of the world. His thoughts were simple, clear, focused on the task at hand, on the well-being of the flock, and the quiet peace that seemed to settle over the land with each passing moment. As they reached the top of the hill, the herdsman paused and looked. Out over the valley below, a vast panorama of hills and valleys bathed in the soft, golden light of the moon. The world felt quiet here, far removed from the noise and rush of daily life. The expanse before him was silent and still, the only sounds the soft bleats of the sheep and the distant murmur of a stream winding its way through the valley below. The air was crisp and fresh, and the herdsman breathed deeply, taking in the stillness, the calm that seemed to envelop everything. There was a profound connection here, a bond between man, nature, and time that felt timeless. The earth beneath, his feet, the sky above, the flock beside him, everything was in balance, each element playing its part in a gentle, unhurried rhythm that had been repeated for generations. His movements, though slow and deliberate, carried a sense of purpose, each step a quiet reflection of the life he led. He had walked this path countless times, but each time felt like the first a fresh moment, a new opportunity to connect with the land and its rhythms. The herdsman turned back to the flock, his gaze steady, his presence calm. The sheep were close behind him, their soft bleats a soothing counterpoint to the stillness of the night. He resumed walking, guiding them gently onward, the the path ahead winding through the hills, leading them into the quiet embrace of the night. With every step, the herdsman felt more deeply the sense of peace that settled around him, the rhythm of his own breath matching that of the land, the sheep, the night itself. The hills around him rolled gently away, their contours softened by the moonlight, creating a landscape of shadows and light that seemed to echo the steady beat of his own heart. The journey continued, slow and peaceful, a quiet walk through the night, where the only sound was the rustling of the leaves in the breeze and the soft, rhythmic crunch of grass and earth beneath his feet. Each step brought him deeper into the night, deeper into the quiet rhythm of the world, where time seemed to stretch and the mind could drift, carried along by the soothing sounds and gentle motion of the land. The herdsman's footsteps were the heartbeat of the night, steady and calm, leading the flock onward into the embrace of the moonlit hills. The herdsman continued his journey, each step carrying him deeper into the serene embrace of the night. The path before him stretched out in a quiet, undisturbed line, winding through the rolling hills that were now bathed in the soft, ethereal glow of the moon. The air, cool and crisp, carried the delicate scent of earth and grass, mingled with the faint fragrance of wildflowers that had closed their blooms for the night. As he walked, the herdsman's steady gaze never faltered, his eyes taking in the simple beauty of the world around him. The quiet bleats of the sheep echoed softly in the stillness, their woolly bodies moving in unison, following the rhythm of his steps. Each hoofbeat was a soft percussion against the earth, adding to the natural symphony that seemed to unfold with every passing moment. The world around him felt both vast and intimate, the rolling hills and the endless stretch of sky above seeming to fold into one peaceful, unified whole. Above, the stars shone brightly, like distant beacons in the night, casting their light across the landscape and illuminating the path ahead. The herdsman paused for a moment, taking in the stillness of the night, the calm that seemed to settle over the land like a soft, invisible blanket. His breath, slow and even, matched the rhythm of the world around him, as if the earth itself were breathing in harmony with his movements. There was a profound sense of connection here between the man, the land, and the animals he tended. It was a quiet connection, born of time spent walking these same hills, of the years spent in harmony with the cycles of nature. The herdsman's life, simple though it was, felt deeply rooted in the land, like the ancient trees that stood tall along the path, their leaves whispering softly in the breeze. As the journey continued, the hills began to rise more steeply, the path narrowing, as it wound its way up the side of a small mountain. The air grew cooler as they ascended, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the promise of more distant vistas. The herdsman's pace remained steady, his thoughts focused on the task at hand, guiding the flock safely along the trail. The gentle rustling of leaves above, the distant call of an owl, and the faint murmur of a stream below blended together into a quiet, calming melody that seemed to echo the steady rhythm of the herdsman's steps. The sheep, moving in their quiet procession, followed closely behind him, their presence a comforting reassurance in the stillness of the night. The path wound upward, leading them ever higher, and the herdsman could feel the vastness of the world around him stretching out in all directions. The hills, bathed in moonlight, seemed to roll on forever, their contours softened by the silver light. As they reached the summit, the herdsman paused once again, his gaze sweeping across the valley below. The land stretched out in a vast, unbroken panorama, the valley floor bathed in the soft glow of the moon, while the distant hills were shrouded in shadows. It was a peaceful sight, the kind that filled the heart with a quiet sense of awe. The herdsman stood there for a moment, taking in the beauty of the landscape, allowing the calm of the night to wash over him. His thoughts, like the landscape, seemed to stretch out endlessly, drifting gently along with the rhythms of the world. There was no hurry, no need for anything but the quiet, steady pace of the journey. The sheep, too, seemed at peace, their steady bleats and soft movements, blending with the stillness of the night. The herdsman's eyes moved back to the path ahead, and he resumed his journey, the rhythm of his steps once again in harmony with the land. The path began its descent now, winding gently down the far side of the mountain, leading them into the quiet valley below. The world around them seemed to shift, the air warmer now, carrying with it the scent of fresh grass and the soft murmur of the stream below. The herdsman's steps remained steady, his heart and mind in perfect harmony with the land, as he continued to guide the flock on their journey through the peaceful night. The stars above, their light faint but constant, seemed to watch over them, their silent presence a reminder of the vastness of the world, and the quiet, enduring rhythm of time that passed so gently through the hills and valleys. The night, soft and serene, continued to unfold around them, each step a quiet testament to the bond between man, nature, and time itself. The herdsman moved onward, his every step a quiet testament to the slow and steady rhythm of the land. The valley beneath him, once bathed in moonlight, was now shrouded in the soft, comforting embrace of dusk. The cool evening air seemed to caress his skin, carrying with it the delicate scent of wet earth and the faint, sweet aroma of wildflowers that dotted the landscape. The path beneath his feet, though familiar, was never quite the same. Each evening brought a new tapestry of shadows, subtle changes in the contours of the land that whispered of the passage of time. The herdsman had walked these paths for years, and yet each step was a fresh discovery, as if the land itself held secrets that could only be revealed in the quiet solitude of night. The sheep moved steadily behind him, their soft bleats blending with the rustling of the trees and the distant murmur of the stream winding its way through the valley. Their woolly forms glowed faintly in the dim light, their movements gentle and unhurried, like a quiet, living river following the herdsman's lead. As they traversed the winding trail, the herdsman could feel the subtle shifts in the air, the way the breeze stirred the branches above him, the way the earth seemed to shift under his feet, as if the land itself was breathing in time with his own rhythm. The wind, once still, began to pick up, carrying with it the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of nocturnal creatures settling in for the night. The herdsman slowed his pace, his senses attuned to the change in the air. There was something about this breeze, something familiar yet different, like an old friend who had returned after a long absence. It whispered of distant places, of faraway lands where the hills were higher and the air carried the weight of ancient stories. It seemed to weave through the trees with a kind of purpose, bending the branches just so, as if guiding the herdsman onward, drawing him deeper into the heart of the valley. As he walked, the sounds of the night grew more pronounced. The gentle rustle of the leaves above him, the soft murmur of the stream below, and the steady bleats of the sheep seemed to merge into a single harmonious melody. The world felt alive, with the quiet symphony of nature, its rhythm so steady and familiar that the herdsman could almost feel them in his bones. There was a deep comfort in this, a sense of belonging that had been forged over countless nights spent walking these same paths. The breeze, now stronger, carried with it the earthy scent of the land and the faint, salty tang of the distant sea. The herdsman paused for a moment, allowing the wind to wash over him, filling his lungs with the cool, crisp air. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the wind in his hair, listening to the sound of the earth beneath his feet. There was something timeless about this moment, something ancient that connected him to the land in a way that words could not explain. He could almost hear the voices of those who had walked these paths before him, their presence lingering in the air like a soft echo, The hills, once distant, now seemed closer, their contours more defined in the dim light. The path ahead narrowed as it wound its way through a dense thicket of trees, their branches reaching out like arms, beckoning the herdsman deeper into the valley. The breeze, though soft, seemed to carry with it a sense of urgency now, as if urging him to move forward, to follow the path that had been laid before him. With a final glance at the valley below, the herdsman continued his journey, the soft sound of his footsteps mingling with the whispering wind and the steady bleats of the sheep. The world around him was both vast and intimate, a place where the rhythms of nature and the passage of time were inextricably linked. Each step he took was a reminder of the simple beauty of the world, a world where the land, the sky, and the creatures that roamed it were all part of a greater, more enduring whole. The herdsman walked on, guided by the wind, the land, and the steady rhythm of his own heart. The path ahead was long, but he knew it well, and with each step he felt the deep, abiding connection to the earth beneath him, a connection that would last long after the moon had set and the stars had faded from the sky. The wind, though gentle, was his constant companion now, weaving through the trees, carrying with it the promise of new horizons and quiet journeys yet to come. And so, as the herdsman continued his journey through the whispering breeze, he was not alone. The wind, the land, and the flock of sheep were with him, each step a testament to the quiet, enduring rhythms of the night, the passage of time, and the connection that bound all things together in a peaceful, timeless harmony. The moon hung low in the sky, casting its soft, silvery light over the landscape, turning the hills and valleys into a tapestry of shadows and shimmering highlights. The herdsman moved steadily along the path, the sound of his boots pressing gently against the earth, the only audible noise in the quiet of the night. The air was cool and crisp, carrying with it the faintest scent of pine and damp earth, a fragrance that seemed to grow stronger as the path wound its way deeper into the valley. The sheep, moving silently alongside him, grazed lazily on the dew-kissed grass, their woolly forms glowing faintly in the moonlight. They were creatures of habit, their movements slow and steady, as if guided by the rhythm of the land itself. The herdsman smiled to himself as he watched them, his heart warmed by the simple peace of the moment. There was a certain beauty in this solitude, a quiet grace in the way the world seemed to unfold with each step he took. The hills stretched out before him, their slopes soft and undulating, covered in a blanket of grass that whispered gently in the breeze. The trees that lined the path stood tall and proud, their branches swaying gently in the wind, casting intricate shadows on the ground below. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light and dark that seemed to dance across the forest floor. It was a scene that felt timeless, as if nothing had changed in centuries. The herdsman paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the landscape around him. The valley, bathed in moonlight, stretched out endlessly before him, its rolling hills and quiet streams a testament to the enduring peace of the land. He had walked this path countless times, yet each journey felt like a new experience, as if the land itself was revealing new secrets with every step. The moon, high above, illuminated the world in its soft glow, casting long shadows that stretched out before him like a silent guide. The sky was a deep shade of blue, dotted with stars that twinkled faintly in the distance, their soft light merging with the silvery glow of the moon. The night felt endless, the hours stretching out like a quiet river flowing through time. With a slow breath, the herdsman continued his journey, his footsteps steady and unhurried, in sync with the rhythm of the land. The flock followed him, their movements slow and deliberate, their soft bleats blending with the sounds of the night. The steady murmur of a nearby stream reached his ears, its waters running smoothly over rocks and pebbles, a quiet reminder of the ever-flowing passage of time. As he walked, the herdsman's mind drifted, lost in the tranquility of the night. There was something deeply comforting about these quiet hours, the world hushed under the weight of the moon's gaze. The gentle breeze, cool and refreshing, stirred the leaves above him, creating a soft rustling sound that seemed to echo the rhythm of his thoughts. It was a moment of peace, a moment to reflect on the simplicity of life, on the bond between man and nature that had existed for as long as the hills had stood. The herdsman's gaze lifted to the sky, where the moon bathed the land in its silver light. He had always felt a deep connection to the moon, its quiet, unwavering presence in the sky, a constant reminder of the cycles of life. The moon had seen countless seasons pass, had watched over generations of men and animals as they moved across the land, their lives unfolding in the shadow of its light. It was a symbol of constancy, of endurance, of time's slow march forward. As the herdsman walked, the moon seemed to follow him, its light casting long shadows across the path, guiding his steps in the quiet darkness. The hills around him seemed to rise and fall with the rhythms of his own breath, the land alive with the sound of the breeze and the soft padding of the sheep's hooves against the earth. The world was peaceful, serene, and still, as if time itself had paused to take a deep breath. The herdsman reached a small rise in the path and paused, looking out over the valley below. The moonlight bathed the landscape, casting long, soft shadows across the hills and valleys, turning the world into a dreamscape of silvery light. The sheep continued to graze, their quiet bleats adding to the symphony of the night, a gentle lullaby that seemed to echo the deep, unspoken connection between the herdsman and the land. As he stood there, the herdsman felt a deep sense of gratitude, a quiet acknowledgement of the beauty of the world around him. This was a life that, though simple, was rich with meaning. It was a life defined by the slow, steady rhythms of nature, by the quiet companionship of the land and the creatures that shared it. The herdsman smiled softly to himself and began to walk again, his steps steady and sure, his heart at peace. The journey ahead was long, but it was one he knew well, a path he had walked countless times before. With the moon as his guide and the steady rhythm of the night accompanying him, he felt ready for whatever lay ahead. The journey continued, the peaceful silence of the night wrapping around him like a familiar cloak. The world was still, and the herdsman moved forward, his steps steady, his heart calm, and the silver moonlight leading him onward. The wind began to stir gently, sweeping through the trees with a soft rustling sound that seemed to carry secrets only the night could understand. The herdsman adjusted the weight of his staff in his hand and continued along the narrow path, his gaze moving across the valley as the moonlight bathed it in a serene, silvery glow. The sheep moved beside him, their woolly forms casting soft shadows as they followed, the occasional bleat of one breaking the silence in a soothing harmony with the natural sounds around them. The hills before him stretched out like a vast, rolling sea of green, dotted here and there with ancient trees that stood tall like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. It was in moments like this that the herdsman felt most connected to the land, as if he were part of the eternal dance between earth and sky, bound to the rhythms of the world in a way that words could never fully describe. The distant call of an owl echoed softly from the trees, a reminder that the night was alive with its own quiet mysteries. He paused for a moment, lifting his gaze to the heavens above, where the stars twinkled like countless tiny candles scattered across a dark velvet sky. Each star seemed to burn with its own quiet, eternal light, a tiny point of calm in the vastness of the universe. The herdsman felt a deep sense of peace settle over him, the cool night air caressing his face and bringing with it the earthy scent of the land he had known all his life. The sheep grazed on the tender grass, their movements slow and methodical, each one lost in its own quiet world of hunger and contentment. As the herdsman stood there, his thoughts began to wander, carried on the wind that whispered through the branches of the trees. The land had always been his companion, and in moments like these, when the world seemed to stretch out before him in its endless beauty, he felt deeply connected to it, as if he were just one part of a greater whole. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth, a fragrance that brought memories of days long past, of moments shared with his family, of childhood days spent running through the hills and playing in the fields. Those memories seemed to merge with the present, creating a sense of continuity, of time moving slowly but surely, like the steady flow of a river that winds its way through the valley, never rushing, never stopping. The herdsman took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill his lungs, and slowly exhaled. The world was so still, so quiet, that he could hear the soft murmurs of the stream far below, the gentle babble of the water as it wound its way through the valley. It was as if the land itself was speaking to him, telling him things he could never fully understand, but always felt in his heart. With a small, contented smile, the herdsman resumed his walk, the rhythmic sound of his footsteps in the soft earth, blending with the peaceful sounds of the night. The moon, now higher in the sky, cast its soft glow over the hills, illuminating the path before him and making the world seem even more magical, more alive. The sheep, unaware of the herdsman's thoughts, continued to follow in their own steady pace, their quiet bleats adding to the symphony of the night. The trees seemed to stand even taller now, their branches reaching out like arms to embrace the cool night air, their leaves rustling softly as if they too were sharing in the quiet joy of the evening. The herdsman felt a deep sense of belonging, as if he were one with the land, his every step a part of the larger rhythm of life. There was something timeless about it, something that transcended the passage of days and years, a rhythm that had been passed down through generations. He was part of that rhythm, just as the land and the animals were, and together they moved in harmony through the slow dance of time. As the path began to curve gently upward, the herdsman felt a lightness in his heart, a feeling of deep satisfaction. That came from knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be. The hills before him rose slowly, their soft contours illuminated by the moon, and beyond them the valley stretched out like a vast canvas, waiting to be painted with the colors of the dawn. He could feel the approaching dawn in the coolness of the air, the subtle shift in the night that signaled the coming of a new day. The sheep, too, seemed to sense it, their movements becoming a little more purposeful as they moved closer to the top of the hill. The herdsman's thoughts returned to the journey ahead, to the quiet hills and valleys that awaited him in the coming days, and he smiled, knowing that each step, each moment, was a part of the larger story that had been unfolding for centuries. The wind shifted, and the herdsman's cloak fluttered gently in the breeze, the fabric brushing against his skin like the whisper of the land itself. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life he led, for the quiet, steady rhythm of his days. There was peace here, in the simplicity of the land, in the quiet companionship of the sheep, and in the ever-watchful presence of the moon above. As he climbed the rise of the hill, he paused once more, his eyes taking in the view before him, and he felt, for a moment, that the entire world was at peace. The valley stretched out before him like a patchwork quilt, the soft moonlight casting shadows that seemed to shift and change with each passing second. The herdsman's heart swelled with quiet joy, and he continued on his way, his steps steady and sure, guided by the stars above and the whispers of the wind around him. The night, with all its quiet beauty, seemed to fold itself into him, becoming part of who he was, and he knew, without a doubt, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The herdsman continued his path, the steady rhythm of his steps becoming a lullaby in the stillness of the night. The path wound gently upward, the earth beneath his feet soft and cool from the evening dew. The sheep, their wool shining faintly, in the moonlight, followed dutifully, their quiet bleats echoing through the hills. Each bleat seemed to blend harmoniously with the night, as if the world itself had tuned itself to this serene melody. The herdsman paused briefly, his gaze drifting across the landscape that spread out before him. The valley below, bathed in silver moonlight, stretched as far as the eye could see, the edges of the hills softened by the glowing light, creating a scene of tranquility that seemed to carry a quiet promise. He felt the coolness of the breeze against his face, a refreshing reminder of the night's embrace. The trees stood tall and still, their branches swaying gently in response to the wind, their leaves rustling like whispers among old friends. There was something timeless about the way the night moved through this land, as though it had been this way for centuries, untouched by the passing of years. The herdsman's hand rested lightly on his staff as he gazed up at the stars above, each one a distant flicker in the vast expanse of the sky. They seemed to shimmer with a quiet, constant energy, offering silent guidance for those who knew how to look. It was a feeling he had come to know well, that sense of being guided by something greater than himself, something that connected him to the land, to the animals, and to the rhythm of the world. As he continued up the path, the sheep followed without hesitation, their trust in him absolute. They had always known where to go, their instincts guiding them through the hills with an ease that came from generations of wisdom passed down through the flock. The herdsman smiled to himself, feeling that same connection to the land that the sheep had. It was a bond that went beyond words, beyond reason, a bond that existed in the very heartbeat of the earth beneath his feet, the quiet movement of the sheep, the soft whispers of the wind, and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures all blended together, creating a soundscape that felt as ancient as the hills themselves. He had walked this path countless times, but each journey felt new, as though there was always something fresh to discover in the quiet expanse of the night. As he ascended higher, the landscape shifted subtly, the trees giving way to open spaces, where the grasses waved gently in the breeze. The herdsman could see the outlines of distant hills rising on the horizon, their jagged peaks cutting through the dark sky. It was a view that had always brought him peace, as though the land itself was offering him a gentle embrace. The herdsman took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, and released it slowly, letting go of any tension that remained in his body. There was something about the simplicity of this life, the quiet repetition of the days and nights, that brought him a deep sense of contentment. The world moved slowly here, and he had come to appreciate that. There was no rush, no urgency, only the steady passage of time, marked by the rise and fall of the sun, the shifting of the seasons, and the gentle cycle of life that unfolded each day. As the path rose further, the herdsman caught sight of a small outcrop of rocks that marked the highest point of the hill. He had reached this spot many times before, and it always offered him a moment of respite, a place to pause and take in the beauty of the world around him. The view from the top was breathtaking, with the valley stretching out like a blanket of green, dotted with clusters of trees and streams that glistened in the moonlight. The soft light of the stars above seemed to reach down and touch the earth, casting a serene glow over everything. The herdsman stopped for a moment, letting the peaceful silence of the night wash over him. He closed his eyes, feeling the cool air on his face, and allowed himself to become part of the landscape. It was as if time itself had slowed, and in that moment he was one with the land, the animals, and the night sky. There was no separation, no distance between him and the world around him. Everything was connected, intertwined in a way that defied explanation. It was a feeling that transcended words, a deep understanding that could only be felt in the quiet moments when everything else faded away. The herdsman opened his eyes, taking in the beauty of the night once more before continuing on his journey. The path before him was clear, and he knew exactly where it would lead. He had walked it many times before, but each step felt new, as though the world itself was unfolding before him for the first time. The steady movement of the sheep beside him, the gentle rhythm of his own steps, and the quiet whispers of the wind all blended into one harmonious melody that seemed to echo through the hills. The herdsman continued on, his pace unhurried but steady, as the world around him continued its slow, timeless dance. The moon, now higher in the sky, cast its silver light over everything, making the landscape seem even more magical, more alive. The hills, the trees, the grasses, and the animals, everything was bathed in the glow of the moon, creating a scene of peace and tranquility that seemed to stretch on forever. The herdsman's heart felt light, and he knew that in this moment he was exactly where he was meant to be. The journey would continue, as it always had, but for now there was nothing to do but walk and enjoy the quiet companionship of the night. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of a new day. But for now, there was only the stillness of the night and the quiet journey ahead. The herdsman's steady footsteps echoed softly in the stillness of the night, as he continued his journey along the winding path that rose gently upward, leading him deeper into the heart of the hills. The quiet movement of the flock, their woolly bodies grazing on the soft grasses beneath their feet, was the only sound that accompanied him. Each bleat of the sheep seemed to meld with the rhythmic crunch of his boots on the earth, creating a steady, soothing cadence that reverberated through the landscape. The night was calm, the cool air carrying with it the sweet fragrance of wildflowers and damp earth, mingling in a way that only nature could orchestrate. The moon hung low in the sky, its soft glow casting long shadows across the hills, painting the world in shades of silver and blue. It was a sight the herdsman had seen countless times, yet each time felt just as mesmerizing as the first. He paused for a moment, his eyes drifting over the vast expanse of land before him. The hills rolled away in every direction, a patchwork of green and gold, stretching toward the horizon where the stars began to blur together, creating a glittering blanket that seemed to cover the earth itself. There was something deeply peaceful about this landscape, something that soothed the soul and quieted the mind. The herdsman often found himself lost in these quiet moments, the weight of the world lifting from his shoulders as he simply walked, accompanied by nothing but the sounds of nature and the steady movement of his flock. The journey ahead was familiar, a path he had traveled many times before, but the landscape had a way of making it feel new, as though each step he took was part of an unfolding story that only the land itself could tell. The herdsman glanced down at the sheep, their white forms standing out in the darkness like ghosts. They moved in unison, a living, breathing entity, their movements slow and deliberate, each step in perfect harmony with the one that came before. The bond between the herdsman and his flock, was one of trust, an unspoken understanding that had been forged over years of shared experience. He knew the needs of each sheep, knew their habits, their strengths, their weaknesses. It was a relationship built on the quiet respect that comes with living in sync with the rhythms of nature. The path ahead grew steeper as the herdsman pressed on, the moonlight illuminating the rough terrain. His boots crunched on the loose stones beneath him, but the path was clear, and his steps were sure. He had walked these hills so many times before, each journey blending into the next, but each one carrying with it a sense of discovery, a quiet awe at the beauty of the land he called home. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves in the trees and carrying with it the faintest hint of rain. The herdsman paused again, glancing up at the sky. It was still clear, the stars bright against the deep blackness of the night, but there was a change in the air, a subtle shift that signaled the coming of a storm. It wasn't a cause for concern. Storms in the hills were a natural part of life, but it was a reminder of the unpredictable nature of the world around him. He smiled to himself, his weathered face creased in the way that comes from years of working beneath the open sky. Life in the hills had taught him to be patient, to wait for the storms to pass, to trust in the land and its rhythms. The sheep moved steadily beside him, their wool glowing softly in the moonlight, their bleats becoming less frequent as they settled into the familiar routine of the night. The herdsman took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp night air, feeling the coolness fill his lungs before releasing it slowly, letting the tension of the day slip away. He had always found comfort in these quiet moments, the steady rhythm of the earth beneath his feet, the gentle sound of the wind through the trees, and the peaceful movement of his flock. The land had a way of grounding him, reminding him of his place in the world. He was a part of something much larger than himself, a silent watcher of the land's endless cycle. The sky above seemed to stretch on forever, a vast, endless expanse, its beauty both humbling and awe-inspiring. The herdsman had often thought about the stars, wondering if they had always been there, shining down on the earth, a silent witness to the passage of time. They were constant, unchanging, their light flickering across the night sky, much like the herdsman's own quiet journey through life. He had seen many seasons come and go, and with each one, the land had changed, but the stars remained the same, a steady presence in the night. As he continued up the path, the wind began to pick up, rustling through the grass and trees, carrying with it the first hints of rain. The herdsman glanced up again, the darkening sky now filled with heavy clouds. The storm was coming, but he didn't feel alarmed. He knew the land well, knew how to read the signs of the weather, and he trusted in his ability to adapt. He was prepared for whatever the storm might bring. The flock, sensing the change in the air, had begun to move a bit faster, their pace quickening as they followed the herdsman. There was something instinctual in their movements, a deep understanding that the storm was approaching. The herdsman smiled again, his heart light as he watched them move in unison. It was a sight he had seen countless times before, but it never failed to fill him with a sense of pride. There was a rhythm to their movements, a flow that seemed to mimic the very heartbeat of the land. As the storm clouds gathered above, the herdsman quickened his pace, the sheep following closely behind. The wind howled through the hills, the first drops of rain beginning to fall from the sky. It was time to move, to find shelter for the night. The herdsman knew the hills like the back of his hand, and he could already see the silhouette of a small shelter ahead, nestled against the base of a hill. The sheep would be safe there, protected from the storm. He smiled to himself once more, his heart filled with gratitude for the land that had given him so much. The storm was coming, but it would pass, just as it always did. And when it was over, the land would remain unchanged, eternal, and waiting for the next quiet journey to begin. The herdsman pressed forward, the storm now in full force, but he felt no fear. There was a quiet strength in him, a knowing that he was part of something much greater than himself. The journey would continue, and he would continue to walk the hills, watching over his flock, a silent witness to the land's timeless beauty and rhythm. The night had fully claimed the hills now, the air thick with the cool moisture that settled from the storm's passing. The herdsman's boots left faint impressions on the soft, damp earth, their rhythm steady as he moved forward, his silhouette barely discernible in the shadow of the tall, ancient trees lining the path. The moon, now free from the clods, bathed the landscape in a soft silver glow, casting long shadows across the winding trail that lay ahead. The sheep, though momentarily unsettled by the brief storm, had settled into a peaceful quiet, their movements slow and deliberate as they followed their guide. The herdsman did not hurry. He trusted the land and the rhythm of the flock, knowing that both would carry him to where he needed to be. Each step he took seemed to blend seamlessly with the natural world around him, the crunch of his boots on, the earth a gentle echo in the otherwise silent night. The cool breeze, now carrying the freshness of rain-soaked grass and the earthy scent of wet soil, moved softly through the trees, rustling the leaves in a hushed symphony. It was a song the herdsman had grown to love, the natural whispers of the world that spoke of age-old cycles and endless constancy. The path ahead was familiar, yet tonight it felt different. The shadows seemed deeper, more pronounced, as though the night itself was reaching out to envelop him in its quiet embrace. He did not mind. He had walked this path countless times, and yet, with each passing night, the land seemed to speak in new ways, revealing secrets he had never before noticed. The trees, tall and ancient, stood like sentinels along the path, their gnarled branches stretching out into the night sky. The wind sang through them, sending ripples through the thick leaves, and every so often a lone branch would creak in the quiet air, the sound a soft reminder of the land's strength and endurance. The herdsman paused for a moment, allowing himself to become lost in the stillness. His eyes, ever watchful, scanned the horizon, taking in the quiet beauty of the valley below. The hills stretched out before him, rolling gently toward the distant edges of the world. He could see the faint outlines of distant mountains, their peaks barely visible under the shroud of night. The stars above, though numerous, felt distant, as though even they were observing this quiet moment, silently watching the land unfold beneath them. The sheep, sensing no immediate danger, continued to move steadily, their woolly forms glowing. Faintly under the moonlight, the herdsman smiled softly. They trusted him as he trusted them. It was a bond forged over years of silent understanding, a connection that went beyond words or commands. They moved together as one, a single entity moving through the night. His thoughts drifted to the fleeting moments of stillness like this, moments when everything seemed to pause, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The night was a time of reflection, a time for him to connect with the land, to understand its rhythms, and to feel the heartbeat of the earth beneath his feet. He knew the hills like the back of his hand, every twist of the path, every turn of the valley. The land was his home, and it spoke to him in ways that no words could ever capture. As he walked, he could feel the weight of time itself, pressing softly on his shoulders, but it was not a burden. It was a reminder of the continuity of life, of the generations that had walked these hills before him, and the generations that would walk them long after he was gone. It was a cycle that never ended, always returning to the same quiet rhythms. The sheep moved along, undisturbed by the world around them, their bleats few and far between, blending with the soft murmur of the wind and the rustling of leaves. They were safe in the herdsman's care, their path guided by his steady hand. He knew that the journey ahead, though familiar, would bring new challenges, as it always did. The land was unpredictable, and the seasons changed with the passing of time. But for now, the stillness of the night wrapped itself around him like a protective cloak. The faint rustle of grass, the soft thud of hooves on the earth, and the whisper of the wind through the trees, these were the sounds of the world that had shaped his life. They were the sounds of his home, his constant companions in this quiet, enduring journey. The herdsman's eyes narrowed slightly as he peered into the distance. Ahead, the path began to rise again, and the hills seemed to stretch endlessly before him. In the distance, He could make out the faint outline of a small village, its lights twinkling softly in the distance. It was a place he often passed through, a place of fleeting human activity. But tonight, the village felt distant, like a memory that had faded into the shadows. The world outside the hills, the bustling life of the towns and cities, seemed irrelevant. Here, in the quiet sanctuary of the land, it was a reminder of the life he had chosen, the life of simplicity and solitude, away from the noise of civilization. His gaze returned to the path before him, his footsteps sure as he continued his journey. The sheep moved beside him, their steady pace matching his own. They trusted him, and in return, he trusted them. Together, they walked through the night, a quiet procession that seemed to embody the very essence of the land itself, timeless, unhurried, and in perfect harmony with the world around them. The land would change, the seasons would pass, and the winds would shift, but the rhythm of the hills, the movement of the flock, and the steady footsteps of the herdsman would endure. This was the quiet, unspoken promise of the land, and the herdsman carried it with him as he walked the path of shadows, guided by the moon and the steady beat of his heart. Each step was a quiet affirmation of his place in the world, a reminder that he was part of something much larger than himself. The hills would endure, the sheep would graze, and the herdsman would walk. Each journey an echo of the one before it, and each night a continuation of the timeless rhythm of the land. The quiet night continued to unfold, the shadows stretching long across the hills as the herdsman walked on, his heart at peace with the world, his footsteps blending seamlessly with the land, as it had always been and always would be. The cycle continued, unbroken, a constant reminder of the enduring beauty of the earth and the quiet strength of the one who walked it. As the herdsman continued his steady pace through the undulating hills, the world around him seemed to stretch and breathe in quiet harmony. The distant mountains loomed like silent sentinels, their peaks lost in the shroud of mist that had begun to rise with the night's cooling air. The moonlight, now full and bright, bathed the landscape in a ghostly light, casting long, twisting shadows that danced like ancient spirits across the path. The flock followed him, their woolly bodies, grazing the soft earth as they moved with the rhythm of the herdsman's steps. Each movement was fluid, synchronized, as though the sheep had come to understand the unspoken language of the herdsman. The cadence of his breath, the rhythm of his gait, and the gentle swish of his cloak as it brushed the damp ground beneath him. The air was rich with the scent of damp soil and wet grass, a fragrance that seemed to carry with it the very essence of the earth. The leaves of the trees whispered quietly in the breeze, a soft murmur that blended with the distant babble of the stream far below. It was a sound that the herdsman had come to rely on, a steady, comforting rhythm that calmed his mind and eased his weary bones. He had walked these paths so many times before, and yet each journey felt like a new beginning. The land had its way of speaking to him, subtle, gentle, but unyielding in its language. The rustle of the leaves, the soft patter of hooves on the earth, the distant call of an owl, these were the sounds that carried him forward, through the hills, through the valleys, into the heart of the night. The stars above twinkled like forgotten dreams, each one a flicker in the vast expanse of the universe. They seemed to hang just within reach, a constant reminder of how small and fleeting his existence was, yet how deeply connected he felt to the land. There was no hurry in his steps, no rush to arrive at the end of the journey. The night was his companion, the earth his home, and the sheep, his charge, were his responsibility. His life had always been one of simplicity, of silence, of unspoken bonds with the land. It was a life that allowed him to listen to the quiet, to the rhythm of the earth, to the pulse of life that beat gently under the surface of the world. He smiled to himself, the corners of his eyes crinkling with a quiet joy. The night held no fear for him. Instead, it was a constant source of comfort. The world at night was more honest than it ever was in the daylight hours, more true to its nature. It was a time when things could be understood without words, when the silence could speak louder than anything else. The herdsman's fingers gently tightened around the walking stick in his hand as he continued on, feeling the wood smooth beneath his fingertips. He had crafted it himself, carved with care, shaped by his hands in moments of quiet reflection. It was a part of him, just as the land was. Each step taken along the path was not just a step through the hills, but a step through the tapestry of his life, woven into the fabric of the earth. The flock, too, had become a part of this story, a symbol of the connection he shared with the land. The way they moved, the way they grazed, the way they followed him without question. It was a partnership built on trust and time, on a shared understanding that transcended language. As the path wound upward, the herdsman's gaze turned to the horizon, where the faint outline of the village could be seen in the distance, its lights flickering like stars against the darkness. It was a place he had passed through many times, but tonight it felt distant, as if it belonged to another world entirely. The life of the village was a world of noise and haste, of endless tasks and never-ending motion. But here, in the quiet of the hills, time slowed. The earth, the sky, the stars, they all moved at their own pace, unhurried, eternal. And it was in these moments, in the stillness of the night, that the herdsman found his peace. He had once been part of that world, the world of the village, of bustling life and constant change, but he had long since chosen the quiet hills, the solitude of the land. He did not regret it, not for a moment. In fact, he had never felt more connected to the world than he did now, walking the familiar path through the rolling hills with the sheep at his side. The land had a way of grounding him, of reminding him of his place in the grand scheme of things. Here, he was part of something larger than himself, something that had existed long before his birth and would continue long after his death. Sheep, too, were part of this eternal rhythm, moving through the night with a quiet grace that mirrored his own. Each step they took was a step through the passage of time, each hoofall a reminder of the enduring cycle of life. As he moved onward, the herdsman felt a deep sense of belonging. He was where he needed to be, doing what he was meant to do. There was no uncertainty, no doubt in his heart. The world around him was constant, unchanging in its natural rhythms. The hills would always be here. The sheep would always follow, and the stars would continue to shine above, guiding him through the night. And so he walked, his heart at peace with the world, his feet in tune with the rhythm of the earth. The shadows grew longer as the night deepened, and the world seemed to slow even further. The air, cool and crisp, wrapped itself around the herdsman like a blanket, a gentle reminder of the stillness that surrounded him. The flock moved quietly beside him, their woolly bodies blending into the landscape as if they were one with the earth itself. The herdsman smiled again, the soft curve of his lips a silent acknowledgement of the beauty of this moment. In the distance, the hills stretched on, endless and eternal, a reminder of the vastness of the land and the quiet strength of those who walked it. There was no need for words here, no need for anything other than the silent, steady rhythm of life. The land would continue, the sheep would graze, and the herdsman would walk. It was a quiet existence, but it was one he had come to cherish, for it was in this silence, in this stillness, that he had found his true home. The night would carry on, the path would wind ever onward, and the herdsman would remain a silent witness to the passing of time, a keeper of the land's quiet rhythm. As the herdsman's footsteps continued to echo through the quiet night, The landscape around him seemed to stretch farther and wider with each passing moment, a vast tapestry of hills and valleys unfolding beneath the gentle glow of the moon. The flock moved alongside him, their steady rhythm blending seamlessly with the soft rustle of the grass beneath their hooves, the sound of their woolly bodies grazing almost indistinguishable from the faint whispers of the wind through the trees. The air was crisp, cool against his skin, carrying with it the earthy scent of the land that had long since become his home. The herdsman breathed deeply, the fresh, untainted air filling his lungs, and for a moment the world seemed to stop, as if the very earth itself had paused to take a breath alongside him. The night had settled in completely now, the stars scattered across the vast expanse above like silver dust, each one twinkling with quiet brilliance. The herdsman's eyes followed their dance, tracing the constellations that had guided him. Through countless nights, their light a constant companion in the solitude of the hills. He had walked these paths for years, perhaps decades, and yet every journey felt as though it were his first. There was something timeless about the rhythm of the earth, something eternal in the quiet pace of the night that seemed to hold both memory and promise in its breath. The hills rolled away in every direction, their contours softened by the moonlight, and the trees, tall and ancient, stood like silent sentinels, their branches reaching high into the sky, whispering secrets to one another in the cool breeze. The herdsman's mind wandered, but his steps remained steady, his connection to the land as unshakable as ever. It was a connection that transcended words, a bond that had been forged through years of quiet understanding, of slow, deliberate movements, of moments shared in silence. He felt it in the earth beneath his feet, in the steady beat of his heart, in the sound of the flock moving beside him. It was a bond that existed in the space between breaths, in the rhythm of each step, in the way the world seemed to slow down, just for him. As he walked, the herdsman could feel the weight of time pressing gently upon him, not in the sense of burden, but in the way the land held history, the way each moment was layered upon the next, creating a story that stretched back to the beginning of the world. He was a part of that story, a small piece in the larger tapestry of life, and yet, in that moment, he felt immense. He felt the weight of the earth's breath as it pulsed beneath him, the slow, steady rhythm of life that had been uninterrupted for countless generations. It was a feeling of peace, of belonging, and he welcomed it with every step he took. The flock moved with him, their soft bleats and the rhythmic sound of their hooves, a soothing counterpoint to the stillness of the night. They were not just animals to him, they were companions on this journey, just as much a part of the landscape as the trees and the hills. They moved in harmony with the land, following the same rhythms, and in their presence, the herdsman felt a deep sense of comfort. The land was alive with subtle energy, a hum beneath the surface that could be felt in the soles of his feet, in the air he breathed, in the wind that rustled through the leaves. It was the heartbeat of the earth, steady and unchanging, and the herdsman had come to know it as well as he knew his own. It was a silent language, one that spoke in the language of movement, of stillness, of the slow passage of time. And in that silence, he found solace. The path ahead wound up the hillside, and the herdsman glanced toward the horizon, where the outline of the distant mountains appeared, their jagged peaks outlined against the night sky. The village, with its distant lights flickering like stars, seemed so far removed from this world. It was a world of noise, of hurried steps, of constant movement and change. But here, in the hills, there was no hurry. There was only the steady pulse of the earth beneath his feet, the calm rhythm of the flock beside him, and the vast, unchanging sky above. He could hear the faint murmur of the stream in the valley below, its waters winding their way through the landscape like a soft lullaby. The stream had been a constant companion throughout his life, just as the stars had been. It had seen the seasons change, the years pass by, and it had carried on, as it always would. The herdsman could not help but smile at the thought. He had walked these paths so many times, yet each time felt like the first. The earth had a way of renewing itself, of offering up its beauty anew with every passing moment. It was a reminder that life, too, was like the land constantly changing, but always rooted in something deeper, something timeless. The herdsman's gaze returned to the flock, moving steadily beside him. Their rhythm was a part of him, just as his rhythm was a part of them. They had become an extension of his own heartbeat, a reflection of the quiet steadiness that defined his life. There was no urgency, no rush to get anywhere. The journey itself was the destination, and every step was an invitation to breathe. In the beauty of the world around him, the night continued to deepen, and the air grew cooler still, carrying with it the scent of fresh grass and the promise of dawn. The herdsman's mind wandered once again, but his steps remained steady, sure. The world was at peace, and for a moment it seemed as though everything had fallen into place. The land was alive, the flock was moving, and the herdsman was part of it all. He was not separate from this world. He was woven into it, his existence as natural as the wind that rustled the leaves, as constant as the moon above. And as the night continued its quiet journey toward morning, the herdsman felt a deep sense of gratitude for the simplicity of his life, for the quiet rhythm that had guided him for so long. It was a life rooted in the earth, in the stillness, in the slow pulse of time, and it was enough. As he continued his journey through the hills, his heart beat in harmony with the land, and he knew, without a doubt, that he was exactly where he needed to be. The night held a serenity that felt as though it had been suspended in time, stretching endlessly across the land, a quiet stillness that embraced the hills and valleys, wrapping them in a blanket of moonlight. The herdsman walked onward, his steps unhurried, steady and sure. Each footfall echoed softly in the night, a gentle rhythm that blended with the occasional murmur of the flock moving beside him. The sheep, their wool gleaming faintly in the dim light, meandered along the path, unaware of the quiet vigil that had been kept over them for countless generations. To the herdsman, the night was not an enemy to be hurried through, but a companion to be savored, a constant that had always been there to guide him. With each passing night, as he moved along the familiar paths, he was reminded of the deep connection he had with the land. The moon above cast a silvery glow, illuminating the contours of the hills in soft, delicate shadows, painting the landscape with an ethereal light. The air was cool, tinged with the fresh scent of grass and the earthy aroma of the land, and, as he inhaled deeply, the herdsman felt the weight of the world slide from his shoulders. There was something deeply calming about the quiet of the night, something that seemed to draw him inward, forcing him to reflect on the rhythms of life, of the seasons that passed, and of the timeless nature of his work. The stars above stretched endlessly, their tiny pinpricks of light casting their glow over the earth, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the quiet insignificance of a single life in the grand scheme of things. Yet, despite the endless sky and the vastness of the world around him, the herdsman never felt small. There was power in the simplicity of his existence, in the small, deliberate movements that made up his days. He was a part of this land, and the land was a part of him, and in this quiet moment, there was no place he would rather be. As the flock moved steadily forward, grazing along the sides of the path, the herdsman's thoughts drifted to the past, to the generations that had come before him, to the ancestors who had walked these same hills, leading their flocks through the night, through the seasons, through the cycles of life and death. It was a life that had not changed much over the years. The tools were the same, the paths were the same, and the bond between man and animal had remained unchanged. In the quiet of the night, that bond felt more tangible than ever, an unspoken understanding that passed between him and the flock, a language older than words. It was a language of trust, of patience, and of quiet vigilance. There was a deep satisfaction in knowing that he was part of something much larger than himself, a link in an unbroken chain that stretched back through time and would continue forward long after he was gone. The sound of the sheep's hooves on the earth was a lullaby in itself, a soft, steady rhythm that seemed to soothe his very soul. With each step, the herdsman's mind grew quieter, his thoughts fading into the background as the night deepened. Around him, the world felt peaceful, at rest, as if everything had settled into its rightful place. There was no hurry here, no rush to get anywhere. The journey was the destination, the path the reward. The herdsman had always believed that. The real beauty of life lay in the moments in between the quiet, seemingly insignificant moments that made up the bulk of his days. It was in the rhythm of his steps, the way the world moved at its own pace, that he found the deepest sense of peace. He glanced up at the moon once more, its light reflecting off the dew on the grass, creating a shimmering effect across the young landscape. There was no need to rush through the night, for in the stillness, the world seemed to offer its answers without words. There was wisdom in the quiet, a wisdom that spoke only to those willing to listen. The herdsman was one of the few who truly understood that. As he walked, he allowed the rhythm of his footsteps to match the pulse of the earth beneath him, his mind and body aligning with the ancient beats of the land. It was a simple act, but in that simplicity lay a profound sense of fulfillment. The days might come and go, the seasons might change, but the land would remain the same, its rhythms eternal, its heartbeat steady. And in that steadiness, the herdsman found his place. He was a part of this land, a steward of its quiet cycles, and in that role, there was no greater purpose. As the night continued to unfold, the herdsman's thoughts turned toward the future, toward the legacy he would leave behind. He thought of the young ones in the village, the children who played in the fields during the day, their laughter echoing through the air. He thought of the next generation of shepherds, those who would one day take up his mantle and continue the work he had done for so long. It was a quiet, unsung life, but it was a life that had meaning, a life that mattered. The land would continue to breathe long after he was gone, and the flock would continue to graze, just as it always had. In the end, that was all anyone could ask for, to have lived a life that was true to the land, true to the cycles of nature, and true to the quiet rhythms that sustained it all. The moon, now high in the sky, bathed the landscape in silver, casting long shadows across the hills. The herdsman's steps grew more deliberate as he made his way up the gentle slope, the path narrowing as it climbed higher. The flock moved. With him, their soft bleats and the sound of their hooves on the earth, becoming a soothing rhythm that blended seamlessly with the stillness of the night. The distant sound of the stream continued to murmur in the background, its water flowing quietly through the valley, a constant companion on this journey. As the herdsman reached the crest of the hill, he paused for a moment, taking in the view. Before him, the valley below was bathed in moonlight, its shadows stretching long across the earth. The world seemed to pause, to hold its breath, as if the night itself was waiting for something. In that moment, the herdsman felt a profound sense of peace, a deep connection to the land, to the flock, and to the generations that had come before him. It was a moment that would last forever in his memory, a moment that was as much a part of him as the land he walked. And as he stood there, gazing out over the valley, the herdsman knew that the quiet vigil would continue, as it always had, and as it always would. For in the quiet of the night, there was a wisdom that could not be found in the noise of the world, a wisdom that could only be heard by those willing to listen. Listen. The world stretched out before the herdsman like an ancient tapestry, woven together by the hands of time and nature. The soft glow of the moon bathed the landscape in its gentle light, casting long shadows across the rolling hills. Every rock, every blade of grass seemed to glow with the kind of quiet beauty that could only be found in the stillness of the night. The herdsman's boots pressed lightly against the earth as he walked, the familiar rhythm of his steps blending harmoniously with the sounds of the night. The air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of dew-kissed grass and the faint fragrance of wildflowers closing their petals for the night. The wind whispered through the trees, their branches swaying gently in the cool breeze, as if they too were part of the landscape's silent watch. With every step, the herdsman felt a deep sense of connection to the land beneath his feet. This was his world, one that had shaped him as much as he had shaped it. The quiet rhythms of the earth, the steady cycles of life and death, were a constant companion. He had lived his entire life with these rhythms, and in doing so, he had come to understand them in a way that few others ever would. As he walked, the flock moved with him, their woolly forms glowing softly under the moon's light. Their gentle bleats filled the air, a peaceful melody that blended perfectly with the sounds of the night, the soft rustling of leaves overhead, the distant murmur of a stream winding its way through the valley below, and the faint rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush. The herdsman paused for a moment, standing at the crest of a hill and looking out over the land. Below him, the valley stretched out in a patchwork of shadows and moonlight, the familiar landscape that he had known since childhood. The trees, the hills, the stream, everything was as it had always been. It was a feeling of profound comfort, one that filled him with a sense of peace that went beyond words. The world, in all its vastness, seemed to slow down in these quiet moments, as if time itself had taken a breath. The herdsman closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the stillness to wash over him. It was a kind of peace that was hard to describe, a feeling of being in perfect harmony with the land, the night, and the world itself. There was no need for words in these moments. The land spoke for itself. The stars above shimmered softly, their tiny pinpricks of light offering a steady, reassuring presence in the sky. The herdsman knew that they had been watching over the earth for centuries, and that they would continue to do so long after he was gone. The world had its rhythms, its cycles, and its natural order, and he was just one small part of it. But that did not diminish the sense of purpose that he felt in his daily work. He was a part of something much larger, a link in a chain that stretched back through time, a chain that would continue to stretch forward long after he was gone. The world, as it always had, would continue to turn, the seasons would continue to change, and the cycle of life would go on. For now, though, the herdsman felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. It was in the quiet moments, like this one, that he truly felt the weightlessness of life. There was no need to hurry, no need to worry. The night had its own pace, one that was steady and sure, and the herdsman simply followed along, moving with it, walking at the same rhythm. The wind picked up slightly, its cool fingers brushing against his skin, and the trees overhead whispered a soft greeting in return. The herd moved beside him, steady and unhurried, the gentle sound of their fare, hooves on the ground like a lullaby that soothed his very soul. With every step, he felt himself drifting further into the embrace of the land, as if the earth itself was welcoming him home. The night, with its calm and its beauty, had a way of grounding him in a way that nothing else could. It was as though he could feel the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, the steady beat that had existed long before him and would continue long after. There was no greater peace than that. As the herdsman continued his journey, he found himself thinking about the land in a way that he never had before. He had always understood it, always respected it, but now, in the quiet of the night, he felt a deeper connection to it. The hills, the trees, the stream, they were not just a backdrop for his work, but an integral part of it. They were his companions, and in turn, he was theirs. The land had its own rhythm, its own life, and he was simply a part of it, just as the sheep were, just as the trees were. He paused again, taking a deep breath and looking out over the land once more. It was so quiet, so still, that it almost felt as if time itself had come to a halt. For a moment, he wondered if the land had always been like this, if it had always spoken in whispers, if it had always carried this same quiet rhythm. Perhaps it had, and it was only now, in the solitude of the night, that he truly understood. He was not just a herdsman. He was a keeper of this land, a silent watcher over its rhythms and its cycles. It was his job to protect it, to nurture it, to help it continue to thrive. In return, the land had always given him everything he needed: the food, the shelter, the peace. The relationship was unspoken, but it was there, strong and enduring, as timeless as the stars above. The flock continued their journey, following the herdsman along the path, their steady bleats and soft footfalls creating a symphony of sound that blended with the night. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the land, and the world seemed to stretch out before him in endless waves of light and darkness. The journey was not over, but it didn't need to be. There was no rush. There was no hurry. The night was long, and in it, the herdsman had all the time he needed. The silence was his companion, and the land, in all its quiet beauty, would always be there to guide him, just as it had always done before. The night deepened further, but the herdsman walked on, his steady steps marking the passage of time, a silent witness to the eternal dance between man, land, and the endless sky. The night air carried with it a faint chill, a reminder of the passing seasons that never ceased to roll forward. Beneath the vast canopy of stars, the herdsman continued his steady trek, the rhythm of his footsteps unbroken as he walked along the well-worn path. His eyes, accustomed to the dim glow of the moon, scanned the horizon, taking in the quiet beauty of the landscape around him. The hills, bathed in silver light, stretched endlessly before him, their outlines softened by the gentle touch of the moon. The night was serene, filled with a deep sense of peace that seemed to settle over the land like a heavy blanket. It was in these moments that the herdsman felt most connected to the world around him, his senses alive to the sounds, smells, and subtle shifts in the landscape that marked the passage of time. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the faint fragrance of wildflowers. It was a soft sound, one that seemed to call to him, urging him forward, deeper into the night. The wind, though gentle, had a way of making its presence known. It stirred the grass beneath his feet, rustled the leaves above him, and sent a shiver through the air. The trees swayed in response, their branches creaking and groaning, as if in quiet conversation with the elements. The herdsman paused for a moment, closing his eyes and lifting his face to the wind. It was a familiar sound, one that he had grown accustomed to over the years. It was as though the wind had a language of its own, speaking in soft whispers, telling secrets only the land could understand. He had always felt a deep connection to the wind, a sense that it was more than just a natural phenomenon. It was a part of the land's soul, carrying with it the stories of the earth, the changes in the seasons, and the ever-moving cycle of life. The wind had always been a companion, and in these quiet moments, it felt as though the wind was speaking directly to him, guiding him along his journey. The flock moved steadily beside him, their soft bleats adding to the gentle symphony of the night. The herdsman's thoughts drifted as he walked, the soothing sounds of the wind and the quiet rhythm of his steps lulling him into a state of deep contemplation. His mind wandered back to the days of his youth, to the time when he first began tending the flock. He had always felt a deep sense of purpose in his work, a connection to the land that went beyond mere necessity. It was more than a job. It was a way of life, one that had been passed down through generations, a tradition that bound him to the earth in a way that was hard to explain. He thought of the countless hours spent walking these same paths, the long days and nights spent in solitude, listening to the land, watching the seasons change, and learning the subtle rhythms of nature. It had been a life of simplicity, but also of profound depth. The wind, still whispering through the trees, seemed to echo these thoughts, carrying with it a sense of timelessness that the herdsman had come to understand so well. As the herdsman continued on his path, the landscape began to change. The hills, once soft and rolling, began to rise more sharply, their contours more defined against the night sky. The wind, now stronger, carried with it the scent of pine and the cool, crisp air of the higher elevations. The herdsman adjusted his pace, the familiar sound of the flock's hooves echoing in the stillness around him. It was as though the land itself was guiding him, urging him forward into the unknown. The trees, tall and ancient, stood like silent sentinels along the path, their branches swaying in rhythm with the wind. The herdsman felt a deep sense of reverence for these ancient trees, knowing that they had stood for centuries, watching over the land as it changed and evolved. They were the guardians of the earth, holding the stories of the past within their gnarled branches and roots. The wind, too, seemed to carry the weight of these stories, its whispers filled with the echoes of ages long gone. It was a reminder that the herdsman, in his quiet journey, was part of something much larger, a cycle of life that had been unfolding for centuries. He was a link in the chain, one that had been forged by the land itself. The wind grew stronger as the herdsman ascended the hill, the air becoming cooler and more invigorating. The stars above him twinkled brightly, their distant light offering a sense of comfort and guidance. The land, though vast and silent, seemed to speak to him in the language of the wind. It was as though the earth itself was alive, its pulse beating in time with his own, a quiet rhythm that connected him to the world around him. The journey, though long, felt like a natural extension of his own existence. The herdsman had always known that this was his place in the world, to walk these hills, to tend the flock, to listen to the wind and the land, and to carry forward the legacy of those who had come before him. As the night wore on, the herdsman's steps grew more deliberate, his mind focused on the journey ahead. The wind, still whispering, seemed to carry with it a sense of purpose, urging him to continue. He knew that the path would not always be easy, that the journey would be filled with challenges and uncertainties, but he also knew that he was not alone. The land, the wind, and the flock were his companions, and together they would continue on this journey, guided by the rhythms of nature and the quiet wisdom of the earth. The herdsman smiled to himself, a quiet sense of contentment settling over him as he walked. The world, in all its vastness, was both beautiful and fleeting. But in this moment, as the wind whispered through the trees and the flock moved beside him, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The journey was not over, but for. Now the path ahead was clear, and he was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he was part of something much greater than himself. The stillness of the night deepened, wrapping itself like a soft, warm blanket around the herdsman and his flock as they continued their journey along the winding path. The air was crisp and cool, the scent of pine trees mingling with the earth's natural fragrance, creating a comforting, almost familiar atmosphere. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a gentle, silvery glow that illuminated the terrain ahead, creating a dreamlike quality to the landscape. The hills, now steeper and more rugged, seemed to stretch endlessly, their contours softened by the ethereal light, casting long shadows that danced on the ground. The herdsman's footsteps, measured and deliberate, echoed in the quiet, a constant, rhythmic sound that matched the steady movement of the flock behind him. There was a profound peace in this solitude, a serenity that only the night could offer, and the herdsman savored it as he walked, feeling the deep connection to the earth, beneath his feet, to the land that had cradled him his entire life. The only sounds that accompanied him were the faint rustling of leaves in the wind and the occasional bleat of the sheep as they moved with quiet determination, their woolly forms shifting in the soft glow of the moonlight. As he walked, the herdsman's thoughts drifted back to the past, to the days of his youth when he first learned the ways of the land, the secrets that only time and experience could teach. He had spent countless hours walking these same hills, learning the subtle cues of the land, the changes in the air, the patterns of the animals, and the ever-changing sky above him. It was a life of simplicity, yes, but one filled with profound depth, a life that was guided not by the chaos of the world around him, but by the rhythms of nature. The path ahead seemed to beckon, a gentle invitation to continue, to explore further into the night. The herdsman paused for a moment, looking up at the stars that stretched endlessly across the heavens. They were like tiny beacons of light, guiding him through the darkness, offering him a sense of direction and comfort. There was a quiet wisdom in the stars, a timeless presence that reminded him of the cycles of life, of the seasons that came and went, of the constant ebb and flow of time. He had always found solace in their quiet, unwavering presence. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the faint rustle of the trees and the coolness of the higher elevations. The herdsman welcomed it, feeling the breeze against his face, a gentle reminder of the ever-changing world around him. The flock, moving steadily along behind him, seemed to sense the shift in the air as well, their pace quickening ever so slightly, the quiet sound of their hooves on the earth creating a soothing melody in the night. The path wound upward, climbing gently but steadily as the hills grew steeper, and the herdsman knew that this was a familiar stretch of land, one that led to a higher vantage point, a place where he could rest and take in the vastness of the land. As they ascended, the air grew cooler, and the landscape began to change, the trees thinning out as they reached the higher elevations, giving way to a view that stretched for miles in every direction. The herdsman paused again, this time to take in the beauty before him. The moon cast its soft glow over the valley below, where the land seemed to roll endlessly, a patchwork of fields and forests, rivers and streams, all bathed in the same silvery light. It was a breathtaking sight, one that reminded him of the vastness of the world and his small place within it. But in this moment, under the stars and with the flock beside him, he felt a deep sense of peace. This was his world, his place of belonging. The silence around him was profound. The only sounds the soft bleats of the sheep and the occasional rustle of the trees in the wind. It was a silence that carried a sense of both stillness and anticipation, as if the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The herdsman continued his journey, his steps steady, his mind clear, and the path ahead seemed to open up before him, offering a sense of purpose and direction. The gentle slopes of the hills, the coolness of the air, the rhythm of his footsteps, everything was in harmony. As he walked, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe for the land, for its beauty and its ability to provide year after year. It was as if the land had always known what was needed, always in tune with the natural order of things. And the herdsman, in his quiet way, was simply a part of that order, a keeper of the land's wisdom. The night deepened further, the moon, rising higher in the sky, casting long silvery shadows that stretched across the landscape. The herdsman's movements grew slower, more deliberate, as he approached the crest of the hill. The wind, still whispering through the trees, seemed to carry with it a sense of finality, as if the journey was nearing its end. The herdsman paused, once again looking out over the vast expanse of the land, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey, for the quiet moments that had filled his life, for the land that had always been there, offering him a sense of purpose and peace. The sheep, too, seemed to sense the change, their movements slowing as they reached the top of the hill, content to stand in the stillness of the night. The herdsman smiled softly, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. In these quiet moments, under the stars, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The journey had brought him here, to this place of serenity, and in the embrace of the night, he felt at peace with the world around him. The night continued its slow, quiet dance, the wind now a soft murmur, the moonlight casting its glow over the earth, and the herdsman walked on, his steady footsteps carrying him forward into the unknown, but always in harmony with the land that had shaped him. As the herdsman continued his journey through the night, the world around him seemed to slip into a deeper tranquility, the very air growing denser with the calm that only the midnight hours could bring. The once clear path had now become more rugged, the grass underfoot thick and unyielding. But the herdsman moved on with the same steadfast rhythm, his boots tracing familiar steps on the terrain that had long been his guide. The sheep, moving silently along with him, had now grown accustomed to the slow, deliberate pace of their shepherd, each one instinctively knowing when to adjust their steps to match the herdsman's steady movements. Their bleats, once frequent and loud, had faded into an occasional murmur, blending with the surrounding silence, creating a soothing backdrop to the herdsman's thoughts. The herdsman was no stranger to this solitude, this quiet time of reflection that came with each nightfall. It was in these moments, with the weight of the world resting softly on his shoulders, that he would allow his mind to wander, tracing memories, reliving experiences, and finding the deep connection between himself and the land that had raised him. The mountains in the distance, their silhouettes softened by the pale light of the moon, were an ever-present reminder of the passage of time. He had spent so many years walking these hills, each journey marking another chapter in his life, each step a continuation of an age-old story that had been told for generations. It was a story of harmony between man and nature, of respect for the land and all its creatures, and of a life lived in simplicity, where each day brought its own small challenges and quiet triumphs. In his early years, the herdsman had not fully understood the wisdom embedded in these routines. He had longed for adventure, for something beyond the endless stretch of hills and the quiet bleating of sheep. But as the years passed, as the days turned into months and then into decades, he had come to realize that the adventure he sought was not something distant, but something woven into the fabric of his daily existence. There was wisdom in the land, in the slow rhythm of nature, in the steady cycle of the seasons. And the herdsman, with his unwavering dedication, had learned to listen, to observe, and to learn from the world around him. His footsteps echoed softly in the cool night air as he paused momentarily, taking in the sight of the moonlit hills ahead, the distant silhouette of trees against the sky, and the soft rustle of the flock behind him. The land felt endless in its beauty, but it also felt intimate, as though it knew him in ways few other things could. It was here, amidst the quiet vastness, that he felt most alive, most connected to the world. The herdsman's thoughts shifted to his family, to the generations of shepherds before him who had walked the same paths, tended the same flocks, and followed the same rituals. It was a legacy passed down through time, each shepherd learning the craft from the one before, each step an imprint on the earth that would remain long after they were gone. He wondered about the generations that would follow him, the ones who would walk these same hills, feel the same winds against their skin, and gaze upon the same stars. Would they understand the land as he had come to understand it? Would they listen to its whispers, feel its rhythms, and find solace in its quiet embrace? The thought lingered in his mind as he resumed his journey, his gaze sweeping over the hills that seemed to stretch forever. There was no need for words here, no need for grand speeches or declarations. The land spoke for itself, its beauty and serenity enough to stir the deepest parts of the soul. The herdsman had learned to embrace this quietude, to accept it as a companion on his travels, and in its silence he had found peace. As the hours passed, the herdsman continued onward, his steps measured and steady. The sheep followed in unison, their movements a testament to the bond between them and their guide. The night, with its deepening quiet, wrapped around them like a protective cloak, shielding them from the concerns of the world beyond the hills. It was in these moments, far from the distractions and noise of society, that the herdsman felt most at home. There was no need for the hustle and bustle of city life, no need for the constant demands of the modern world. Here, in the company of the land and the sheep, there was only the present, only the quiet now. As he walked, the herdsman allowed himself to reflect on the life he had led. He thought about the choices he had made, the paths he had taken, and the moments that had shaped him into the man he was today. It had not always been easy, and there had been times when the weight of his responsibilities felt too much to bear. But through it all, he had learned the value of perseverance, of sticking to the course even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. It was this quiet resilience that had become his guiding force, and it was this same spirit that he hoped would carry on after him, passed down to the generations that would follow. The herdsman paused once more, this time to drink in the sight of the valley below. The moonlight glinted off the surface of a small stream that wound its way through the landscape, reflecting the soft light in a shimmering dance. The stillness of the moment was profound, the beauty of the world around him almost overwhelming in its simplicity. The herdsman took a deep breath, allowing the cool air to fill his lungs, feeling the weight of the world lift just a little with each inhale. This, he thought, was the reward of a life lived in harmony with nature. There were no grand achievements, no accolades to chase, but there was peace, a deep, lasting peace that came from knowing one's place in the world. As the night wore on, the herdsman continued his journey, his steady footsteps carrying him through the quiet hills. The land, ever patient, ever enduring, embraced him as it had done for countless generations, and he, in turn, embraced it. This was the rhythm of life, the steady pulse of the earth beneath his feet, the silence of the night and the quiet strength of the sheep that followed him, all moving together in harmony, one step at a time. The herdsman's journey continued through the stillness of the night, the air crisp and cool as it wrapped around him, carrying with it the sweet, earthy scent of the land. With each step, he felt more connected to the world around him, the soft rhythm of his movements in perfect harmony with the night's quiet embrace. The moon, now higher in the sky, bathed the landscape in a gentle silver light, casting long shadows across the hills that seemed to stretch endlessly. The flock, their woolly forms faintly glowing in the moonlight, moved steadily alongside their guide, their quiet bleats and the soft sound of their hooves a calming counterpoint to the surrounding silence. The herdsman's thoughts wandered. As he walked, his mind drifting as freely as the breeze that ruffled the tall grass. He thought about the land, the hills that had always been there for him, as constant and unchanging as the stars above. These hills, which had witnessed the passage of time for generations, seemed to offer an unspoken promise. No matter how much the world changed, the land would remain providing a steady foundation for those who knew how to listen and respect. His hands, calloused from years of work, instinctively guided the flock, each gesture a reminder of the deep bond between man and animal. It was a bond built on trust, on quiet understanding, and on a shared rhythm that flowed between them, as naturally as the river that wound its way through the valley below. The herdsman had learned early in life that it was not through force or haste that the land revealed its secrets, but through patience, through waiting, and through watching. And tonight, as the night deepened, he once again embraced that stillness, that quiet rhythm that had become the heartbeat of his existence. The path, winding gently through the hills, seemed to invite him onward, each turn offering new vistas of the peaceful world that lay before him. The land stretched out in every direction, a tapestry of shadows and soft light that seemed to fold in on itself, as if the hills were cradling him in their embrace. The herdsman paused for a moment to take in the view, his eyes resting on the distant silhouette of the mountains, their peaks dusted with the silver glow of the moon. He had spent so many years on these hills, and yet, each night, they never failed to fill him with a sense of awe, a reminder of the vastness of the world, and the smallness of his place within it. But it was not a feeling of insignificance that filled his heart. Rather, it was a deep sense of belonging. He was part of this land, just as the trees were part of the hills, and the sheep were part of the flock. And in that quiet understanding, there was peace. The herdsman's steps continued, slow and steady, the soft sound of his boots on the earth, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo through the landscape. As the hours passed, the world around him seemed to grow even quieter, the air thick with the stillness of the night. The only sounds were the faint rustling of the trees in the breeze, the occasional bleat of a sheep, and the gentle trickle of the stream far below. It was a world that seemed to exist outside of time, a place where the past, present, and future blurred together in a seamless flow. In this timelessness, the herdsman found comfort. His life, though simple, had always been shaped by the slow passage of time, by the cycles of the seasons and the rhythms of the land. And now, as he walked through the night, he felt that same sense of continuity, a quiet reminder that, no matter what the future held, he was part of something much larger than himself. The flock, too, seemed to sense the peace that surrounded them. Their movements were more measured now, their bleats softer, as if they, too, were in tune with the rhythm of the land. They followed their guide, step by step, in perfect harmony with the world around them. There was no urgency, no rush, just the quiet certainty of a journey that had been undertaken countless times before. The herdsman glanced up at the sky, his eyes tracing the path of the stars above. The constellations, familiar and constant, hung like silent sentinels in the night sky, watching over the land as they had done for millennia. The herdsman smiled softly to himself, knowing that, in the grand scheme of things, he was but a fleeting presence in the vast expanse of time. Yet, in this moment, he was content. He was a part of the land, a part of the night, a part of the quiet, unhurried flow of life that moved through the hills and the valleys. As the night continued to unfold, the herdsman felt a deep sense of gratitude for the simple rhythms of his life. The act of guiding the flock, of walking these hills, of being in tune with the land, these were the things that brought him peace. There was no need for anything more. In the silence of the night, he had everything he needed. The flock moved steadily on, and the herdsman, content in his quiet solitude, followed them, his footsteps blending with the soft sounds of the night. There was no hurry. There was no destination. There was only the journey, and in that journey, he found a profound sense of peace. The world, with all its noise and distractions, seemed far away, and in the stillness of the night, the herdsman was reminded of the simple truth that had shaped his life. Sometimes it is only in the quietest, moments that we can truly hear the world around us. And in that silence, we find our place in it. The herdsman walked through the night, his footsteps soft and steady, as if the earth itself welcomed him with each step. The air had grown cooler, the night deeper, and the world around him seemed to pause in a quiet embrace. The moon, high in the sky, cast a silvery light that touched everything in its path, turning the landscape into a serene tapestry of shadows and light. The hills, which had once seemed vast and endless, now felt close, as though they were gently cradling the herdsman and his flock in a quiet sanctuary. The sheep, too, moved with a calm assurance, their soft bleats the only sound breaking the silence that enveloped the night. Their woolly forms were bathed in the moon's glow, their movements rhythmic and unhurried, as though they, too, understood the stillness of the world around them. The herdsman looked up at the sky, the constellations twinkling overhead like 1,000 tiny, distant fires. The stars were his companions, constant and unchanging, their presence a reminder of the vastness of the universe, and his small, yet significant place within it. He had always found comfort in the night sky, in the knowledge that, no matter what happened below, the stars would remain, guiding him through the dark. The path wound gently through the hills, each turn revealing new vistas, yet the herdsman felt no urgency, no desire to rush ahead. The journey, for him, was not about reaching a destination, but about the quiet moments between. The silence of the night spoke to him, a deep and abiding peace that washed over him with each step. His mind wandered, but it was a wandering without aim, a drifting that felt natural, as though he were simply part of the landscape, moving through it as the wind moves through the trees. The earth beneath his feet was solid and sure, its coolness grounding him to the world. His breath came easily, the rhythm of his walking in tune with the natural world, the steady pulse of life around him. The land stretched out before him, rolling hills and distant valleys that seemed to go on forever. Yet in this quiet moment, everything felt contained, as though the entire world were folded into this one peaceful night. The flock, ever steady, followed their guide without question, moving in perfect harmony with him, their lives intertwined with his in ways that were difficult to put into words. The herdsman felt a deep connection to the sheep, as though their lives were part of the same rhythm, their hearts beating in time with his. This bond, unspoken and simple, had been forged over years of shared experience, of quiet moments like this one, where the world was left behind and only the present mattered. The land, with its familiar contours, held no surprises for him. Every hill, every tree, every winding path was known to him, yet tonight, as he walked, everything felt new, as though he were seeing it all for the first time. Perhaps it was the stillness of the night that made everything seem so fresh, so full of possibility. The gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the trees, their rustling a soft melody that added to the tranquility of the night. It was the kind of sound that seemed to wash over the herdsman, soothing him, calming him, as though the land itself were speaking to him in a language only he could understand. His mind, too, was still, empty of thought, filled only with the sensations of the present moment, the cool air, the soft crunch of the earth beneath his feet, the faint rustling of the leaves, and the steady rhythm of the flock moving alongside him. Time seemed to stretch out, to expand, until it felt as though the night itself had no beginning or end, as though it were a constant, a part of the world that had always been here, long before the herdsman's footsteps and long after. The silence was not oppressive. It was a silence that invited peace, a quiet that made space for reflection, for being. The herdsman's thoughts drifted again, not to any specific memory or event, but to the simple feeling of being part of this landscape, of walking through the night with his flock, of feeling the coolness of the earth beneath his feet and the moths. weight of the stars above. There was no rush, no need for anything more. The world had slowed down, and in that slowness, the herdsman felt a deep sense of contentment. It was a feeling that had come over him many times in his life, especially in moments like this, when everything around him seemed to align perfectly. The stillness of the night, the gentle movement of the sheep, the quiet rhythm of his own breath. These moments, simple and serene, were the ones he cherished most. They were the moments that reminded him of the beauty of the world, of the deep connection between himself and the land, of the quiet wisdom that came from living in harmony with nature. The path before him seemed to stretch endlessly, yet the herdsman knew that there was no rush, no need to hurry. The night was his companion, and the journey was simply a part of the world's steady, unchanging flow. The flock moved with him, their presence a constant reminder of the life he had chosen, a life of simplicity, of quietude, of connection to the land. And as he walked, the herdsman felt a deep gratitude for the stillness of the night, for the calm that surrounded him, for the quiet rhythm of the earth that seemed to hum softly beneath his feet. The night deepened further, and the herdsman's footsteps became softer, more measured, as though he were becoming one with the landscape, his movements blending with the land's eternal rhythm. The hills, the trees, the stars, and the flock, they were all part of him now, as much a part of his being as his own breath, his own heart. There was no distinction between himself and the world around him, only the quiet unity of life, moving steadily through the night. As the herdsman continued his journey through the hills, the landscape unfolded around him like a living painting, its colors and shapes shifting gently under the influence of the moonlight. Each step he took seemed to deepen the silence, the cool air filling his lungs with a freshness that carried the scent of damp earth and distant pine trees. The night, ever steady and calm, whispered through the leaves of the trees, which swayed gently in the soft breeze, their branches a delicate dance in the darkened sky. The herdsman's thoughts were as quiet as the landscape, drifting between the present and memories that came unbidden, like distant echoes from a time long past. The soft bleating of the sheep and the occasional rustling of a nocturnal creature, breaking its stillness, only added to the serene soundscape, an orchestra of nature's quiet sounds blending seamlessly together. There was a sense of deep peace in the air, an almost tangible calm that filled the space between the herdsman and the land, making it feel as if the entire world had paused, holding its breath in perfect harmony with his own steady pace. The flock moved beside him, their woolly forms casting faint shadows beneath the moon's gentle glow. Each sheep was a companion in this journey, their steady movements creating a rhythm that matched the herdsman's own, as if the entire world was moving together in one fluid, unhurried motion. The path before him twisted gently upward, leading him toward the higher hills, where the landscape opened up into sweeping vistas that seemed to go on forever. The night sky above, studded with countless stars, stretched endlessly, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the fleeting nature of human existence. And yet, within this vast expanse, there was no hurry. The herdsman moved steadily forward, his pace measured and calm, taking in each step as if it were the most important moment of his life. The world around him was in perfect balance, its rhythms unfolding in perfect time, and he, a small figure in the grand tapestry of life, was simply walking, part of the whole, a quiet witness to the beauty of the night. His mind, too, was calm, free from the clutter of thoughts and worries that often clouded the daytime hours. In the stillness of the night, there was space for reflection, for a deeper connection to the land, the animals, and the rhythm of life itself. He had lived many years in this quiet place, and though the world outside often felt chaotic and overwhelming, here in the hills beneath the stars, there was always peace. The soft, rhythmic steps of the flock beside him grounded him. In the present moment, each movement a reminder of the simple beauty of existence. The earth beneath his feet was firm and steady, a solid foundation that reminded him of the strength and resilience of the land he walked upon. As he made his way up the hills, the herdsman paused for a moment, looking out over the valley below. The soft glow of moonlight revealed the outlines of the trees and the distant stream winding its way through the valley floor. The scene before him was peaceful, a quiet reflection of the world as it had been for centuries. He knew these hills, these trees, these streams, and in a way, they knew him. There was a deep sense of belonging here, a connection that went beyond the visible. It was a feeling that had been cultivated over many years, through countless walks. In the hills, through days spent tending the flock, and nights like this one, spent in quiet reflection beneath the stars. The herdsman's eyes lingered on the landscape, a sense of gratitude filling his heart. He had found peace in this place, a peace that was not easily shaken, no matter the storms that might come in the world beyond. The land was steady, the sky above constant, and in this stillness there was clarity. The night was a time for introspection, for quiet contemplation of the world and one's place within it. The herdsman had come to understand that true peace came not from external circumstances, but from within, from the ability to be still, to listen to the quiet rhythms of the earth, and to allow oneself to become part of them. The path ahead was gentle, winding through the hills in a way that invited the herdsman to continue, to keep walking, to keep moving with the rhythm of the night. There was no rush, no urgency. There was only the steady, calming pace of the journey, the quiet whispers of the wind, and the soft sound of the flock's hooves pressing against the earth. It was a life without haste, without the need for anything other than the present moment. And in this moment, as the herdsman walked under the vast sky, he was content. The hills, the trees, the stars, all of it seemed to be in perfect balance. The earth beneath his feet felt solid, the moonlight gentle, and the stars above a reminder of the infinite beauty of the world. The journey was not about reaching a destination. It was about the walking, about the feeling of the earth beneath his feet, about the peace that came from being in tune with the world around him. As the night deepened, the herdsman's steps became even more deliberate, each movement a meditation, a way to center himself in the quiet flow of the universe. The flock moved steadily beside him, their presence a reminder of the connection between all things, the land, the animals, the stars, and the herdsman. Together, they were part of something larger, something timeless, something that had always been and always would be. The path wound higher, and the herdsman continued onward, the soft rustle of the leaves and the gentle bleating of the sheep, the only sounds breaking the profound silence. In this moment, there was no need for anything more. The world was at peace, and so was he. He walked on, part of the land, part of the night, part of the endless, unhurried journey of life. As the herdsman continued his journey up the winding path, the moonlight bathed the landscape in a silver glow, casting elongated shadows that swayed with the gentle movement of the trees. The flock followed closely behind, their soft bleats, breaking the silence of the night, each sound a note in the slow, rhythmic symphony of the evening. With every step, the herdsman felt the deep connection between himself and the earth beneath his feet. The cool, crisp air filled his lungs, and the steady cadence of his footsteps seemed to synchronize with the gentle pulse of nature around him. The path before him was familiar, winding gently upward toward the ridge that overlooked the valley. The trees that lined the way stood like sentinels, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind as the herdsman passed beneath them, each tree a quiet witness to the passage of time. The flock, always steady, always true, moved with an almost otherworldly harmony, their presence a testament to the simple yet profound bond that existed between the herdsman and his animals. This bond, forged over countless seasons, was the thread that held the herdsman to the land, to the rhythm of the hills, to the eternal cycle of day and night. It was a quiet vigil, a silent promise kept between man and nature, a promise that each step taken together would carry them through the quiet moments of the night and into the peace of the coming dawn. The herdsman's thoughts were calm, his mind focused on the task at hand, yet there was an underlying awareness that the journey was more than just a simple walk through the hills. It was a passage, a movement through time itself, an acknowledgement of the cycles that governed not only the earth, but the very fabric of life. Each step was part of that cycle, part of a rhythm that had been playing out for centuries, long before the herdsman had ever walked these hills, and long after he would be gone. The night around him was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of the stream that ran through the valley below. The herdsman paused for a moment, taking in the vastness of the sky above, the stars twinkling like tiny beacons in the distance. The moon, now higher in the sky, cast its light upon the earth, illuminating the path ahead and creating a soft, silver carpet that stretched out before him. It was a peaceful, almost sacred moment, a time to reflect on the quiet beauty of the world and the fleeting nature of life. The herdsman knew that these moments, though simple, were the most precious of all. In the quiet of the night, in the stillness of the hills, there was a clarity that could not be found in the rush of the daytime world. It was here, in the embrace of the land and the company of his flock, that the herdsman found peace. The path ahead wound gently upward, leading toward the ridge where the herdsman would spend the night. The view from the top was one of breathtaking beauty, offering a sweeping panorama of the valley below, the distant hills, and the endless expanse of the starry sky. It was a reminder of the vastness of the world, of the beauty that could be found in the quietest corners of nature. The herdsman knew this land well, having walked these paths countless times, and yet each journey felt like the first. There was always something new to discover, always a new detail to appreciate, a new wonder to behold. The night was never the same, always changing, always shifting, as if the land itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with the herdsman's steps. The flock continued their steady pace, their presence a comforting constant in the stillness of the night. A herdsman's thoughts drifted, as they often did during these quiet moments, to the past, to the memories of those who had walked these hills before him. His ancestors, the ones who had come before, had walked these same paths, cared for these same lands, and tended to the same flocks. It was a legacy, a tradition that had been passed down through generations, and the herdsman felt a deep sense of connection to them. Their spirits, their wisdom, seemed to linger in the air, woven into the very fabric of the hills, the trees, the streams. It was as if the land itself carried the stories of those who had walked it before, and in walking it now, the herdsman was not just continuing a personal journey, but was part of a larger, timeless story. The hills rose before him, their contours softened by the moonlight, their slopes dotted with patches of grass and wildflowers that swayed gently in the breeze. The path, worn smooth by countless footsteps, led the herdsman upward, toward the ridge where he would find his rest. As he walked, he felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders, the burdens of the day melting away with each step. In the quiet of the night, there was no need for words, no need for anything other than the steady rhythm of his breathing and the gentle sounds of the flock beside him. The night was a sanctuary, a place of peace where time seemed to stand still, where the herdsman could lose himself in the beauty of the world around him. He paused again, looking out over the valley below. The distant lights of the village were barely visible, a faint glow on the horizon. But here, high in the hills, The world felt distant, removed from the hustle and bustle of daily life. It was a place of solitude, of quiet reflection, where the herdsman could find clarity in the simplicity of nature. The flock moved steadily beside him, their bleats soft and rhythmic, a comforting presence in the night. The herdsman's heart swelled with gratitude for this life, for this land, for this quiet existence. In the company of his animals, in the Allah, embrace of the hills, he had found something deeper than peace. He had found a connection to the world, to the earth, to the cycles of nature that governed all life. And in that connection, he had found a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. The journey continued, the path ahead stretching out beneath. The moonlight, the hills rising in the distance, the stars twinkling above. And as the herdsman moved forward, he knew that this quiet vigil, this solitary journey through the night, was where he truly belonged. It was here, in the stillness of the hills, that he felt most at home, most alive, and most connected to the world around him. The path led onward, and the herdsman continued his journey, guided by the quiet rhythm of the night, the steady presence of the flock, and the timeless bond he shared with the land. And as the herdsman continued along the winding path, the first faint light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and purple. The night, with its peaceful quiet and steady rhythm, was slowly yielding to the promises of a new day. The cool, crisp air of the early morning was filled with the scent of dew-kissed grass, the faint fragrance of wildflowers, and the earthy smell of the soil beneath his boots. The path stretched ahead of him, winding through the rolling hills, as it had countless times before, and yet, in the soft glow of the dawn, the world seemed new, imbued with a sense of fresh possibility. The flock moved steadily alongside him, their hooves softly patting the earth as they followed their guide through the tranquil landscape. The herdsman felt a quiet sense of contentment settle over him, a peaceful satisfaction that came from knowing that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing what he had always done. He was a part of this land, as much a part of the hills and fields as the trees that dotted the landscape and the streams that carved their way through the valleys. There was a certain beauty in the simplicity of his life, a profound peace that came from living in harmony with the land and the animals that depended on him. The world around him was alive with the quiet sounds of nature, the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze, the distant call of an owl bidding farewell to the night, and the occasional murmur of a stream as it flowed steadily through the valley. Below, yet despite the constant movement of the natural world, there was an undeniable stillness in the air, a calmness that felt both ancient and timeless. It was as though the land itself was taking a deep breath, preparing for the day ahead, just as the herdsman did each morning before the world came to life. With each step, the herdsman's thoughts drifted back to the nights spent walking these hills, the countless journeys that had shaped his life. His hands, weathered by years of tending to the flock, had become as much a part of the land as the earth itself. The rhythm of his footsteps, the soft bleats of the sheep, the quiet companionship of the night, these were the constants of his life, the things that anchored him to the world around him. As he moved along the path, he could hear a distant chirping of birds welcoming the dawn, their songs rising in harmony with the first rays of sunlight. The sky, once dark and filled with the mysteries of the night, was now beginning to awaken, shifting from shades of deep blue and indigo to a lighter, softer palette of morning colors. The herdsman stopped for a moment, allowing himself to take in the breathtaking sight. The landscape before him was bathed in the soft glow of the morning light, the hills rolling gently into the distance, the trees standing tall and still in the quiet of the early hours. The world was alive with possibility, and yet, in this moment, everything felt perfectly still, perfectly balanced. His breath came slowly deeply, in rhythm with the landscape around him. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes, allowing the stillness to wash over him, to sink deep into his bones. In these quiet moments, far from the noise and rush of the world, he found clarity, a clarity that could only be found in the simplicity of nature, in the steady rhythm of life as it unfolded around him. He opened his eyes once more, and as the light continued to grow, he knew that this was the beginning of another day, another journey. The journey would continue as it always had, with the steady pace of the flock, the unwavering presence of the hills, and the quiet companionship of the land. There was no rush, no hurry. Time, it seemed, moved at its own pace here, as it had for centuries. The herdsman resumed his walk, each step bringing him closer to the top of the hill, to the place where he would pause for the night. As the flock followed, the herdsman's thoughts turned inward, to the quiet moments of reflection that had defined his life. He thought of the generations of herdsmen who had walked these same paths, of the tradition that had been passed down from father to son, from one hand to the next. It was a tradition rooted in the land itself, in the rhythms of nature that had sustained the people who had called this place home for centuries. The land had shaped them, just as they had shaped the land. The herdsman's footsteps were a part of that ongoing story, a part of the long, quiet history that stretched back through the ages. The path ahead of him seemed to stretch on forever, a reminder that the journey, like life itself, was a constant unfolding process. And yet, in this moment, with the sun rising over the hills and the flock moving steadily beside him, the herdsman knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. There was no need for words, no need for explanation. The land, the animals, the steady rhythm of the walk, these things spoke for themselves. It was a life lived in harmony with the world around him, a life lived in quiet peace. As he continued to walk, the herdsman felt a deep sense of gratitude for the simple life he led. He knew that the world beyond the hills was vast and full of noise, but here, in the stillness of the early morning, he had everything he needed. He had the land, the flock, and the peace that came with knowing that he was a part of something much larger than himself. The light continued to grow, and the world slowly began to wake. The herdsman glanced up at the sky once more, watching. As the first rays of sunlight began to stretch across the land, casting long shadows on the earth, it was a new day, and with it came new possibilities. But in this moment, in the quiet of the morning, there was no need for change, no need for anything more. The journey was enough, and the herdsman was content. With one last glance at the rising sun, he continued his walk, a steady rhythm of his footsteps blending with the peaceful sounds of the flock, the land, and the new day unfolding before him. And as the hills stretched out before him, he knew that this quiet, timeless journey would continue for as long as the land would allow. The journey was his, and it was enough. The morning unfolded slowly, its pale light filtering through the branches of the trees, casting intricate patterns of shadows upon the ground. The herdsman walked on, his steady steps a part of the landscape as much as the hills themselves, the sheep trailing quietly behind him. The world around him was waking, but there was a certain stillness that hung in the air, as though time itself had slowed down just for a moment to appreciate the simple peace of this early hour. The wind, cool and soft, carried the scent of fresh earth and wildflowers, a reminder of the quiet beauty of the land. Above, the sky was an ever-deepening shade of blue, and the first birds of the day began to sing their songs, their melodies, a perfect accompaniment to the peaceful rhythm of the walk. Every step the herdsman took seemed to blend seamlessly with the world around him, his movements as natural as the ebb and flow of the seasons. This was a life of harmony, of quiet routine, and of connection to the earth. He could feel the land. Beneath his boots, the familiar path he had walked for so many years. His eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the vast, unbroken expanse of the hills. A scene to stretch on forever, the rolling slopes disappearing into the distance, inviting the mind to wander and wonder about what lay just beyond the next rise. The herdsman did not rush. There was no need for haste in this world, no urgency to hurry through the day. The rhythm of the walk, the quiet movement of the flock, and the unchanging cycle of the seasons were all that mattered. It was a life that had remained the same for as long as he could remember, and he was content in its simplicity. As the path began to climb gently, the herdsman felt a quiet thrill in his chest, the feeling that he was approaching a familiar, beloved place, the summit where the land opened up before him in an expanse of vast, sweeping views. It was a place where he could see the entire valley below, where the sky and earth seemed to meet in a delicate, seamless embrace. It was the spot where he always paused, where the journey seemed to culminate in a brief moment of stillness and reflection. The flock, too, seemed to recognize the significance of this place. Their pace slowed as they reached the summit, the air growing cooler as they neared the top. The herdsman paused for a moment, taking in the view before him. The land, stretching far and wide beneath the vast sky, was alive with the soft glow of the morning sun. The mountains in the distance were bathed in a faint golden light, their peaks piercing the sky like ancient sentinels. The valley below was a patchwork of green and brown, the trees standing like quiet sentries, and the river winding its way through the landscape like a silver thread. Everything seemed to be at peace, as though the land itself was breathing in harmony with the herdsman's quiet heart. It was moments like this that filled him with a deep sense of gratitude, a gratitude for the land, for the journey, and for the quiet solitude that came with the work he did. He had no need for anything more than this, no desire to chase after anything else. His life was a simple one, shaped by the rhythms of nature and the steady pace of the seasons. The herdsman looked back at the flock, his steady gaze taking in each of the sheep as they grazed, content and unhurried. They were, in many ways, a reflection of him, calm, deliberate, and connected to the earth. He knew each of them by sight, each woolly form an individual that played a role in the great cycle of life. The sheep, in their quiet way, depended on him just as he depended on them. They were his companions, his steady companions, through all the years, each day unfolding as the one before it. The land and the animals were his life, his home, and his work. As the herdsman watched the flock, a sense of peace washed over him, the certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The world beyond these hills, with its noise and bustle, seemed far away and insignificant. There was nothing else he needed. The simple life he had was enough. The land, the animals, the rhythms of the day, all were enough. He breathed deeply, inhaling the cool morning air and feeling a deep sense of belonging to this place. It was as though the land itself had claimed him, had marked him as its own. He had always been here, and he would always be here. There was no question of leaving. As the herdsman resumed his walk, the flock following closely behind, he felt the weight of the years of experience in every step. This path was familiar to him, the earth beneath his feet worn smooth by countless steps taken over the course of his life. He had walked this road in sunshine and in rain, through wind and through calm, and each time the journey had brought him back to this place of peace. The hills, the trees, the river, and the sky, these were his companions, his constant friends. His life was simple, yes, but in that simplicity was a deep, abiding peace that others could never know. The world around him, with its distractions and chaos, was distant and irrelevant. He was here, in this moment, in this place, and that was all that mattered. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its warm light over the land, the herdsman felt the familiar pull of the day. There was work to be done, but it was work that he had done for so long that it had become a part of him. It was no longer a task, but a rhythm, a dance that he had learned long ago. With each step, the herdsman moved closer to the heart of the journey, the quiet, steady movement that defined his life. The flock followed closely behind, and the herdsman, too, followed the path of his ancestors, walking the land with a steady, sure step. There was no rush, no hurry. Time moved at its own pace here, and the herdsman knew that the journey, as long as it was, would take him exactly where he needed to be. And as the morning sun continued to rise, filling the world with light, the herdsman's heart was full, his mind quiet, and his soul at peace, knowing that he was living a life shaped by the earth itself. There was no greater gift than this, life in tune with the land, with the animals, and with the quiet, steady rhythm of the world around him. As the day edged toward its close, a soft twilight began to descend over the land, casting a serene glow that seemed to slow time itself. The herdsman, with his steady pace and thoughtful gaze, walked along the well-worn path, his boots crunching softly against the earth. The sheep moved quietly beside him, their woolly forms gliding through the landscape like gentle waves upon a calm sea. The evening air was cool now, carrying the subtle scent of wet grass and wildflowers, their petals still damp from the dew of the day. The sky above, fading from a pale blue to a deeper shade of indigo, stretched wide and endless, inviting the mind to wander among its stars, which began to twinkle faintly in the distance. The herdsman paused for a moment, taking in the peaceful scene around him. The world was settling into its rhythm, preparing for the cool embrace of night. He looked at the valley below, its hills now bathed in the soft, silvery light of the fading sun. It was a familiar sight, one he had seen countless times before, yet it always held a sense of wonder and contentment. There was something timeless about this land, about the way it stood unchanged through the years, its rhythms unbroken by the passing of time. It was a place that felt eternal, its roots deeply embedded in the earth, its spirit unyielding to the forces of the world. And the herdsman, too, was a part of it, a quiet witness to the slow march of time, a caretaker of this ancient land. As the flock grazed peacefully, their soft bleats filling the air, the herdsman felt a deep sense of belonging. He had always been here, walking these hills, tending to the sheep, listening to the rhythm of the world. The simplicity of his life, shaped by the cycles of nature, was a profound blessing. There was nothing he needed that was not already here, no ambition to chase, no desire for more than what the land had already provided. The sun, now low on the horizon, bathed the land in a warm golden light, casting long shadows across the path. The herdsman watched as the last rays of sunlight painted the hills with their soft glow, creating a peaceful, almost magical scene. The landscape seemed to exhale, as if in relief, the day's warmth settling into the earth to rest. The herdsman took a deep breath, feeling the coolness of the evening air fill his lungs. There was something deeply soothing about this moment, a sense of peace that came from the land itself. He had walked this path 1,000 times, and yet it never lost its charm. Each step he took was a reminder of the life he had built here, a life rooted in the rhythms of the earth, a life that had grown and evolved with the seasons. And though the world around him was always changing, this place remained constant. The sheep, grazing contentedly, were a living testament to the harmony between man and nature. Their quiet, steady presence was a reflection of the land itself, calm, enduring, and ever-present. The herdsman smiled faintly, his heart swelling with gratitude for this simple, steady existence. The path wound gently upward, and as he continued, His walk, he could see the familiar silhouette of the old oak tree in the distance. It was a landmark, a reminder of the years that had passed, of the countless sunrises and sunsets he had witnessed from this very spot. The oak stood tall and proud, its branches reaching toward the sky like ancient arms, its leaves whispering. In the evening breeze, it was a symbol of endurance, of resilience, just like the herdsman himself. Every year, it grew stronger, its roots burrowing deeper into the earth, its branches spreading wider to embrace the sky. And every year, the herdsman walked beneath it, as if in silent acknowledgement of the passage of time and the continuity of life. The hills around him were alive with the quiet sounds of evening birds settling into their nests, insects buzzing in the grass, the distant murmur of the stream winding its way through the valley below. The earth seemed to hum with life, as if it too were preparing for the night. The air had grown cooler, and the herdsman pulled his coat tighter around him, relishing the familiar comfort of the evening chill. It was a time for reflection, a time to slow down and appreciate the stillness that settled over the land like a soft blanket. The sheep, now gathered in a tight group, moved toward the shelter for the night, their soft, woolly bodies pressing together for warmth. The herdsman watched them for a moment before turning his gaze back to the sky. The stars were beginning to emerge, their light faint at first, but growing brighter with each passing minute. It was a sign of the night's arrival, of the world, slowly transitioning into a new phase of its endless cycle. The herdsman smiled again, a quiet, contented smile. This was his world. This was his home. The land, the sky, the animals, they were all a part of him, and he was a part of them. There was no place he would rather be. As he turned back toward the shelter, ready to prepare for the night ahead, he felt a deep sense of peace settle within him. The day had been good, the work had been fulfilling, and now it was time for rest. He could hear the soft rustle of the sheep as they settled in for the night, their gentle bleats echoing in the cool evening air. The herdsman walked slowly to the small cabin, his boots crunching softly against the earth. The twilight deepened, and soon the world would be wrapped in the quiet embrace of night. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. The land was at rest, the sky stretched endlessly above, and the herdsman, too, could rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring another quiet day, another steady walk through the hills. And with that thought, he allowed himself to embrace the stillness of the night, content and at peace in the world he had always known. As the herdsman made his way through the familiar path, the landscape seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. The hills rolled gently under the evening sky, their contours softened by the fading light. The air was thick with the scent of earth, fresh grass and wildflowers, each breath a reminder of the quiet peace that had accompanied him on his journey. There was a certain stillness to the world tonight, an unspoken sense of anticipation that hung in the air. The wind, once a playful companion, had grown calm, its whispers now distant and fleeting, as if the earth itself were waiting for something. The sheep, usually so lively and full of energy, had settled into a peaceful, almost hypnotic rhythm, their gentle movements creating a harmonious blend with the surrounding silence. The herdsman's footsteps, though deliberate and steady, seemed to barely make a sound as he walked alongside them. His mind wandered back to the days before, the long seasons of work, the steady passage of time. He had always found solace in the slow, predictable nature of his life. It was a life that had given him purpose, a life that had shaped him as much as he had shaped it. But tonight, there was something different in the air, a shift, an unspoken promise that the calm would soon be interrupted. The herdsman glanced up at the sky, noting the change in its hue. The once clear blue had deepened to a shade of indigo, and the stars were beginning to emerge, slowly at first, then all at once. filling the sky with their steady, calming presence. A full moon was rising on the horizon, casting its silver glow over the land, lighting the path ahead with an ethereal glow. The herdsman paused for a moment to take it all in, the quiet beauty of the landscape, the peace that enveloped the valley, and the stillness of the world around him. This, he thought, was what he had been working for, living for. The simplicity, the connection to nature, the rhythms of the earth. It was a life without pretense, without haste. But even as he stood there, taking in the serenity, he felt a tug. Deep within his chest, a subtle sense of unease. He could not put his finger on it, but the air felt thick, laden with something he couldn't quite grasp. The sheep, too, seemed to sense it, their movements slower now, more deliberate. Their once carefree grazing had given way to cautious steps, as if they, too, were aware that something was about to shift. The herdsman pressed on, his gaze returning to the path ahead. The familiar hills were now bathed in the soft light of the moon, the shadows stretching long across the ground. The world had taken on a dreamlike quality, where every step seemed to echo in the stillness, and every sound felt amplified in the cool night air. He had walked this path countless times before, and yet tonight the landscape seemed different. The trees that lined the trail, once so familiar, now appeared more imposing, their branches casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to reach out toward him. The herdsman felt the weight of those shadows pressing in, felt the tension in the air as the night deepened. The familiar comfort of his routine began to feel foreign, and he quickened his pace, though he could not shake the feeling that something was about to change. The faint sound of a distant storm reached his ears, a low rumble that grew louder. With each passing moment, the herdsman's brow furrowed. The storm had not been predicted. There had been no signs, no warnings. Yet here it was, creeping across the horizon, as if waiting for the right moment to make its presence known. The herdsman glanced behind him, as if the very landscape would offer some answer, some sign. But the hills were quiet, the trees swaying, gently in the evening breeze, their leaves whispering in the wind. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. It was as if the storm had been gathering all around him, quietly building until the time was right. The sheep, now fully aware of the storm, began to move with more urgency. Their quiet bleats filled the air, a soft chorus of unease. The herdsman's steps quickened, and he urged them forward, his thoughts turning to the safety of their shelter. He had to get them there, had to ensure they were protected before the storm hit. But even as he moved, his mind raced with questions. What had caused the shift? Why had the storm come so suddenly? He had seen many storms in his time, but none like this. None that had crept up with such stealth, with such an ominous sense of inevitability. The sky was now darkening, the clouds gathering thick and heavy overhead. The first few raindrops began to fall, each one a cold reminder of the impending chaos. The herdsman pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders, feeling the chill of the night settled deep within him. The rain began to fall faster now, the sound of it pattering against the earth, the soft hiss of the wind carrying it across the hills. The sheep, huddled together, began to move faster, their movements quick and jerky as they sensed the urgency in the air. The herdsman pressed on, his heart pounding in his chest as the storm drew nearer. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, sending the leaves into a frenzied dance. The herdsman could barely hear himself think over the roar of the wind and the rising sound of the storm. His pace quickened, his thoughts focused solely on getting the flock to shelter. But as he moved, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That something far greater than the storm itself was coming. He could feel it in the air, in the way the world around him had shifted so suddenly. The peaceful tranquility of the land had been replaced by an anxious, oppressive energy. And as the storm raged on, the herdsman knew, deep in his bones, that the storm was not the only thing he had to worry about. The wind howled as the herdsman pressed on, urging the flock faster toward the shelter that loomed in the distance, its familiar silhouette barely visible through the rain that poured down in relentless sheets. The storm had escalated swiftly, its fury intensifying with each passing minute. The once calm and tranquil hills were now shrouded in darkness, their contours lost in the blackness of the tempest. The sheep, though accustomed to the weather, moved with a sense of urgency that the herdsman had not seen in them before. They huddled close, their wool damp and matted, their bleats high-pitched and anxious, as if they too felt the weight of the storm's wrath. The herdsman's heart raced as he navigated the slippery terrain, the path now almost impossible to see through the torrents of rain that fell in a continuous, relentless downpour. He could hear nothing but the roar of the storm, the deafening crack of thunder that rattled the earth beneath his feet, and the hiss of the wind as it cut through the trees, their branches thrashing wildly in the gale. His cloak clung to him, soaked through, and he could feel the cold creeping into his bones. But it was not the cold that worried him. It was the ominous sense of something far greater than the storm itself. The sky had darkened beyond the usual shades of twilight. The atmosphere felt heavy, thick with a palpable tension that seemed to press in on all sides. Even as the wind howled louder and the rain intensified, the herdsman could not shake the feeling that the storm was only the beginning, that something darker was drawing near. He had seen storms before, many storms in his years of wandering. The hills, but this one was different. There was a depth to it, a weight, as though it had been summoned by some unseen force, some ancient power that stirred beneath the surface of the earth itself. His mind wandered back to the old tales, the ones whispered by the fire on long winter nights, stories of ancient forces that lived in the land, of forgotten gods and spirits that shaped the world in their own mysterious ways. Could this storm be the manifestation of such a force? Could the land itself be awakening, its dormant power stirred by some unknown force? His thoughts swirled, as wild and untamed as the storm that raged around him. The sheep, too, seemed to sense the unnaturalness of the moment. Their movements were erratic now, their bleats becoming frantic as they stumbled through the muck of the trail. The herdsman shouted, trying to regain control, but his voice was lost in the cacophony of the storm. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching desperately for any sign of shelter, anything that could offer protection from the fury that surrounded him. He could barely see through the torrential downpour, but there on the edge of the valley, the faint outline of the shelter stood, its walls a welcome sight in the swirling chaos. His pace quickened, his muscles straining as he pushed forward. The rain stung his skin like needles, and the wind threatened to knock him off balance, but he pressed on, driven by the need to protect the flock, to keep them safe. The storm seemed to intensify, its power reaching a peak as the herdsman drew closer to the shelter. He could hear the cracking of branches in the trees above, the ominous rumble of thunder growing ever louder, as if the very sky itself was splitting open. The sheep, now in full panic, broke into a frantic run, their hooves slipping on the wet ground as they bolted toward the shelter. The herdsman cursed under his breath, his heart pounding in his chest as he struggled to regain control. His hands were slick with rain, his grip on the lead rope of the lead sheep slipping. He shouted again, but his voice was swallowed by the storm, lost in the maelstrom of wind and water. The sheep had scattered, their bleats echoing in every direction, and the herdsman felt a knot of fear tighten in his chest. They were close, so close to shelter, but now, more than ever, the storm seemed to be pulling at him, trying to tear the flock away from him. His feet slipped in the mud as he ran after the scattered sheep, his heart racing, his thoughts a blur. In the distance, the shelter grew nearer, its dark form more defined against the shifting shadows of the storm. But still, the air felt heavy, thick with the unknown. There was something unnatural about the way the storm raged, its speed, its intensity. It was as if it had been summoned, as if it had a purpose. And in that moment, as the herdsman fought to maintain control over the flock, he understood, deep within himself, that the storm was not just a storm, it was a warning of something greater that was coming. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as a flash of lightning lit up the sky, its jagged form illuminating the valley in a burst of white light. For a split second, he saw something. In the distance, just beyond the shelter, a shape, a shadow, standing motionless against the storm. The herdsman froze, his breath catching in his throat. The shadow was tall, its form indistinct, but it was there, standing alone in the middle of the raging storm. It did not move, did not respond to the lightning, to the thunder, to the fury of the world around it. It simply stood as if waiting, as if watching. His heart pounded in his chest as he took a step back, his mind racing. Who or what could that be? Why was it there, standing alone in the storm? The sheep had finally made their way into the shelter, and the herdsman was about to follow, but the figure in the distance held him in place. The storm, with all its violence, suddenly seemed distant, as if the shadow was the only thing that mattered in that moment. He took another step forward, his heart beating louder in his ears, but the shadow remained still. The rain continued to pour, the wind continued to howl, but the herdsman could not take his eyes off the figure. What was it? And why did it feel like something he was meant to see? The herdsman stood frozen, his eyes locked on the shadow that loomed in the distance, standing resolutely against the fury of the storm. The figure was still unyielding, its form barely visible in the intermittent flashes of lightning that lit up the sky. The wind howled around him, but in that moment, it felt as though the world had been reduced to this single, unnerving presence in the distance. The flock was safely inside the shelter now, huddled together for warmth, their frantic bleats muffled by the thick walls, but the herdsman couldn't bring himself to follow them. His body was rooted to the spot, as if some unseen force was keeping him tethered to the ground. The figure did not move, did not react to the storm that raged around it. It simply stood as if waiting for something. For what, the herdsman could not say. His heart beat faster as he tried to process what he was seeing. The storm continued to whip around him, but all of his senses were focused on the shadow, its presence drawing him in with an irresistible pull. It was a dark shape, indistinct, yet he felt the weight of it, heavy in the air. His mind raced with questions, but all he could do was stand there, staring. What was it? Was it human? A part of him wanted to believe it was just a trick of the storm, a figment of his imagination. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. There was something real about it, something ancient, something that felt out of place in this world. The silence between the howls of the wind seemed to stretch on forever, until at last the figure shifted. Just a slight movement, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a shiver down the herdsman's spine. The figure seemed to notice him, its form tilting slightly, as if acknowledging his presence. A cold wave of unease washed over him. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and he felt his breath catch in his throat. Something about the way it moved so slow, so deliberate, was unnerving. The herdsman's legs began to shake, the weight of his fear anchoring him to the spot. Yet he couldn't tear his gaze away. The storm raged on, but it no longer felt like the storm was the most dangerous thing in the night. Whatever stood before him was something far more ancient, more primal than the fury of nature itself. He took a step back, but the figure seemed to shift again, more pronounced this time. It was no longer standing still, but moving towards him, its form solidifying with each step it took. The darkness of the storm no longer concealed it, but rather seemed to draw back, as if parting to allow the figure to advance. The herdsman's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He wanted to run, to flee to the shelter and lock the door, but his legs wouldn't move. His feet felt as though they were embedded in the earth, rooted by some unseen force. The figure's movements were slow, deliberate, but there was a sense of inevitability to it, a sense that it was coming for him, no matter how much he wanted to escape. The figure was getting closer, and now he could make out more of its features. It was not a human figure, not entirely. Its outline was distorted, as though the darkness itself had taken shape. There was no face, no distinct features, just an overwhelming sense of presence, an energy that seemed to fill the air around him. The herdsman's breath quickened, panic rising in his chest. He had heard stories of such things, ancient spirits, of the land, entities that existed long before mankind had ever set foot on these hills. He had dismissed those tales as superstition, the ramblings of old men around a fire, but now, as the figure drew closer, those stories felt less like myth, and more like a warning. The wind howled louder, as if the storm itself was trying to force him into action, to make him run, but his legs remained frozen. The figure's presence was overwhelming, its form now just a few paces away. It was no longer a mere shadow, but a dark, shifting mass, like smoke and shadows coalesced into something that could almost be touched. The air grew colder, and the herdsman could see his breath in front of him, thick and white in the cold night air. And then, in an instant, the figure stopped. It was mere feet away now, towering over him, its presence overwhelming. The air felt charged, thick with an energy he couldn't describe. The wind seemed to die down for a moment, as if even the storm itself had recognized the significance of this moment. Time seemed to stretch, to elongate, as the herdsman stood face to face with whatever this thing was. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. His mouth was dry, his heart racing so loudly in his chest that he was sure the figure could hear it. It seemed to stare at him, or at least he felt its gaze upon him, though there was no face, no eyes to meet his. The silence stretched on, broken, only by the faint sound of the rain, now just a drizzle against the earth. The herdsman could feel the weight of its presence in his chest, a crushing pressure that threatened to suffocate him. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. It was as though his very being had been drawn into this moment, caught in the pull of something far greater than himself. And then, without a sound, the figure began to fade. Slowly, like smoke dissipating into the night, it melted into the shadows, leaving the herdsman standing alone in the storm. The wind began to howl again, the rain intensifying, but the figure was gone. It was as if it had never been there at all. The herdsman stood for a long while, staring into the empty space where the figure had once been, his mind reeling. What had just happened? What had he seen? And why had it chosen to show itself to him? He didn't have the answers, only a deep sense of dread that gnawed at him from the inside. He slowly turned, his legs trembling beneath him, and made his way back toward the shelter. The storm still raged, but he could feel the weight of the night pressing down on him, heavier than before. What had been revealed to him was beyond understanding, and he knew that whatever force had shown itself, whatever presence had come in the storm, it was not done yet. As dawn broke, the herdsman stood on the edge of the hill, gazing down at the valley below, still shrouded in the remnants of night's mist. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving a crispness in the air, and the sky was now a pale shade of blue, gradually warming with the first rays of sunlight. The land seemed still, almost too still, as if holding its breath after the turbulence of the storm. His heart, however, still thudded painfully in his chest, not from the storm, but from the eerie encounter he had endured. The figure, whatever it was, had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, but its presence lingered, pressing against him like a memory he couldn't shake. He looked down at the flock grazing below, their forms a soft, reassuring sight in the distance, but his mind was far from calm. He couldn't rid himself of the feeling that he was being watched by something not of this world. It wasn't just the storm, or the winds, or the strange sense of unease. It was the profound awareness that something unseen was observing, his every move waiting, just beyond the edge of his perception. The herdsman tried to shake off the thought, but it clung to him. His footsteps felt heavier, his breath shallower, as though the land itself had become a stage, and he was the lone actor in a play whose script he didn't understand. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig beneath his boots seemed amplified, as though the very air held its breath in anticipation. The sheep grazed undisturbed, unaware of his inner turmoil, but he couldn't ignore the sensation that something was lurking, just at the periphery of his sight. He knew the land, knew the rhythms of nature that governed the valley and the hills. He understood the weather, the wind, the animals, the quiet ebb and flow of life in this peaceful corner of the world. But this was something different, something that didn't belong. He tried to push the thought away, focusing instead on his work. The flock needed attention, and the day's duties awaited. He set off toward them, moving slowly, his senses heightened as he made his way across the land. Yet with each step, the nagging feeling of being watched grew stronger. It was as if the very ground beneath his feet was aware of him, echoing back his every thought and movement. The wind, once a friendly companion, now seemed to whisper dark secrets in his ears, carrying with it a faint chill. He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to calm the rising tide of unease. As he exhaled, his eyes caught a fleeting shadow moving just beyond the edge of the trees. His heart skipped a beat, and he froze, every muscle tensed. The shadow was gone before he could fully comprehend what it was. His mind raced. Could it have been the storm playing tricks on his eyes? A trick of the light? Or was it something more? He took a cautious step forward, his gaze fixed on the area where the shadow had been. Nothing. Just the quiet of the morning, the sheep grazing, the soft breeze rustling the leaves. He had been imagining things, surely. But deep down, he knew. He wasn't. The shadow had been real. And whatever it was still out there, watching. He continued on, the peaceful sounds of the valley contrasting sharply with the storm of thoughts raging inside his mind. The sheep, oblivious to his growing anxiety, continued to graze peacefully, their woolly bodies moving in rhythmic synchrony. But to the herdsman, everything felt off. The land, which had always been his sanctuary, now felt like a stage set for something beyond his understanding. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that something was waiting for him to make a mistake, to falter, to show weakness. And the closer he got to the flock, the stronger the sense of being watched became. He tried to ignore it, pushing it aside as best as he could, but every creak of a branch, every gust of wind sent his mind spiraling. The closer he got to the sheep, the more his unease grew. The land that had once felt like home now seemed like a vast, empty place, a place where he was merely a visitor, a passerby in a world that was not his own. His footsteps grew louder in his ears as he walked toward the flock, each step a heavy, deliberate motion. The sheep, who had been so calm, began to stir, their heads turning nervously in his direction. The herdsman stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding. The sheep had never acted like this before. They were spooked, unsettled by something, and it was clear they weren't reacting to him. They were reacting to something else, something far beyond their understanding. His eyes scanned the surrounding land, searching for any sign of danger. Nothing. Yet the tension in the air was palpable, thick and heavy, like the storm that had passed through the night before. His breath quickened as the unsettling feeling of being watched returned with a vengeance. He was not alone. The land itself seemed to hum with an unseen presence, a presence that had been with him since the storm, and which now seemed to draw nearer. It was as if something or someone was watching him from the shadows, its gaze unblinking, unwavering. The herdsman's heart raced as he took another step toward the flock, his mind whirling with questions. What was it? What was out there? Hidden in the shadows, waiting for him? He couldn't stay here. He had to leave, to get back to the safety of the shelter, where the sheep were protected. But something deep inside told him that leaving wouldn't be enough. The presence was, closing in on him, its pull growing stronger with each passing moment. It wasn't just the land that felt different. It was him. Something had changed. He could feel it in his bones, in the very marrow of his being. He had crossed some invisible line, and now he couldn't go back. His mind raced with fear, but a strange sense of calm washed over him as well, as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Something was happening, something beyond his comprehension, and he was caught in its grasp. The herdsman stood there for a long time, staring at the flock, his breath shallow and rapid. The land was quiet now, the silence deafening in its intensity. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches creaking softly, but the stillness hung in the air, thick and oppressive. The sheep had returned to grazing, but the herdsman couldn't bring himself to move. His feet felt heavy, as though they were sunk deep into the earth itself, unable to pull away from the grip of whatever force held him in place. And then, in the distance, he saw it, the shadow. Once more, it moved, flickering just beyond the trees, its form indistinct, shifting in and out of the light. The herdsman's heart skipped a beat as he realized that whatever had been watching him, whatever had been waiting for him, was now drawing closer. Closer. The air had grown unervingly still, and the once vibrant sounds of the valley seemed to fade into a distant hum, leaving only the quiet rustling of the wind through the trees, which now felt like an ancient whisper, more like a warning than a gentle breeze. The herdsman's heartbeat echoed in his ears as he stood frozen on the hilltop, his eyes fixed on the shadow that moved steadily through the trees. It was not a mere trick of the light, nor a figment of his imagination. He could feel it, deep in his gut. The presence was real. The figure in the distance was neither man nor beast, its shape elusive, shifting like smoke under the heavy cloak of the night. With every passing second, it seemed to draw closer, as if the earth itself was urging him to face it. For a long while, the herdsman stood motionless, unable to pull his gaze away. The shadow did not falter, nor did it come any closer with sudden haste, but rather it advanced with a slow, deliberate pace, like something waiting for him to make the next move. The air felt charged, dense with anticipation, and the herdsman couldn't shake the feeling that the world around him was watching, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. His thoughts raced. Should he approach it? Should he run? His legs felt heavy, the earth beneath his feet like an anchor, yet a strange compulsion to move forward tugged at him. He had never experienced anything like this before, never felt so drawn to the unknown, yet paralyzed by fear at the same time. The sheep were restless, shifting uneasily on the hill behind him, but their movements were disjointed, as if even. They could sense the tension in the air. The herdsman glanced back at the flock. They had never acted like this before, even in the harshest of storms or the darkest of nights. They were unsettled, their bleats muffled and distant, as if they, too, understood the nature of the force approaching. His mind spun. What was this shadow? And why now? After all these years of peace, had it come? He could feel a deep, ancient pull in his chest, a feeling of being caught in a web, not of his making, but one he was fated to encounter. He had spent his life walking these hills, following the rhythm of the seasons, listening to the winds, and trusting the unspoken bond between man and land. But this was different. There was no rhyme or reason to this encounter, no familiarity. The natural world had always been predictable, a constant in the herdsman's life. Yet this moment, this strange presence before him, defied all that he had known. His breath caught in his throat as the shadow grew nearer, its shape still unclear, but moving with purpose, its every shift seeming to grow sharper in his perception. With each passing second, the herdsman felt the weight of the world pressing in on him. The decision he had to make seemed to stretch on for an eternity, each second stretching into the next, until he could no longer stand the weight of uncertainty. Slowly, he began to move. His steps were cautious, deliberate, as he started down the path that led toward the trees where the shadow lingered. The earth beneath his boots was cold, the crispness of the morning air biting at his skin, but it was the stillness of the valley that unnerved him most. Not a bird sang, nor a creature stirred. It was as if the very life of the valley had been held in suspension, waiting for this moment to unfold. His hand instinctively went to the handle of his staff, his constant companion on these long walks, the solid wood grounding him in this uncertain moment. The closer he got to the trees, the more the air seemed to thicken, the atmosphere pressing in on him like an invisible force. He could feel the shadow now, not just with his eyes, but with his entire being. It was as though it had always been there, lurking just beyond the veil, and now it had come to greet him. As he reached the edge of the forest, the air grew colder, and the rustling of the leaves seemed louder, as though the trees themselves were whispering, speaking in a language the herdsman couldn't understand. His fingers gripped the staff, tighter, the weight of his own fear pulling at him, but the pull of curiosity was stronger. Stepping into the shadows cast by the trees, the herdsman paused. The shadow was now only a few paces away, and for the first time he could make out its shape, a figure tall and indistinct, almost translucent, as though it were made of the very mist that still clung to the ground. It was neither a man nor a creature of flesh and bone, yet it radiated a presence, a power that was undeniable. The herdsman's heart raced. He had heard stories in his youth, tales passed down by the elders about spirits that wandered these hills, guardians of the land, protectors of the balance. But he had always dismissed those stories as mere folklore, tales spun to explain the inexplicable, legends meant to explain the mysteries of the world. Now, standing before this presence, he was unsure. Was this spirit real? Was it a harbinger? Or something else? As the figure began to move, it seemed to shift, its form blending with the trees around it. The herdsman could hear a faint murmur, as though the figure was speaking to him, but the words were foreign, lost in the rustling leaves. He strained to understand, but there was no translation for the sounds in his ears. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it a whisper, soft but clear. You seek to understand, but you cannot. The words, though faint, sent a shiver through the herdsman's spine. He had no words to respond, no way to break the eerie silence that now hung between them. The figure was not a threat, not in the way he had feared, but it was a reminder of the forces that governed this land, forces that he, in all his years, had never fully understood. His body trembled with the weight of realization. This shadow, this presence, was not something to fight or flee from. It was something to acknowledge, to respect. It was the land itself, its spirit, its heartbeat. And now it had called him forward. With a slow, deliberate movement, the herdsman lowered his staff, placing it gently against the ground. He took one final breath, feeling the presence of the figure as it loomed before him, and he nodded. Whatever this encounter was, it was a part of the land he had walked his entire life, and it was time he learned to listen. The shadow remained, still, as though waiting for him to make the next move. And as the herdsman stood there, amidst the trees, beneath the shadowed canopy, he realized that this moment was only the beginning. Something had changed within him, something deep and unspoken. He could not turn back now. The land had called, and he would answer. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale light over the valley, where the herdsman stood frozen at the edge of the forest. The presence of the shadow, now clearly defined in his mind, lingered in the air, its essence woven into the very fabric of the land. It was not a creature of the flesh, but something far older, older than the trees that reached high into the heavens, older than the mountains that loomed in the distance, their rocky peaks shrouded in mist. The herdsman had been standing there, for what felt like an eternity, the ground beneath him steady, yet every fiber of his being was in a state of unease, as if the very world around him was shifting, like a dream turning uncertain. The distant bleats of the sheep could still be heard, their calls faint echoes, but now they seemed distant, almost foreign to his ears, as if a barrier had been erected between the herdsman and the familiar sounds of the world he had always known. It was then that he realized the land was not the same anymore. Something had changed. The path that had once seemed clear was now tangled, veiled in shadows that had no place in his world. The figure before him, though silent, seemed to breathe, to pulse with a life that was not his own. It was not threatening in the traditional sense, but it was powerful, ancient, and it spoke in ways that the herdsman could not comprehend yet. He could feel its weight. The herdsman closed his eyes for a moment, trying to gather his thoughts, to bring himself back to the certainty of his life. But when he opened them again, the world around him had altered, as though he had crossed into a realm where time and space no longer behaved as they once did. The trees swayed gently, not to the wind, but to an unseen force. The grass beneath his feet seemed to ripple, as though the earth itself was alive and breathing. A whisper in the air, so faint he could barely hear it, reached his ears. It was a voice not spoken in words, but in a tone that resonated with the deepest parts of his soul. You have come to understand what you cannot yet know. The voice was soothing, like the murmur of a river, but it carried with it the weight of 1,000 years. It did not demand an answer, nor did it expect one, but the herdsman felt an undeniable pull to respond. He had walked these hills for so long, and yet, in that moment, they felt as foreign as the night sky. Every step he had taken, every choice he had made, had led him to this place, to this encounter. The path he had known so well, the one he had followed for so many seasons, had been an illusion. The land he thought he understood was a mere reflection of something much larger, much deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. And now it was revealing itself. The shadow, the figure that stood before him, was not a threat, but a guide, an emissary of the land's ancient spirit. It was not here to harm him, but to show him a truth that he had never before been ready to see. The herdsman took a deep breath, his chest expanding as the cool night air filled his lungs. With each breath, he felt more grounded, more attuned to the pulse of the earth beneath him. The figure before him shifted, its shape flickering like smoke, its presence both intangible and overwhelming. There was no fear now, only the realization that this was his destiny. He had been chosen, not by force, but by fate, to witness the hidden truths of the land he had spent his life walking upon. Slowly, the herdsman stepped forward, the ground beneath his feet soft but steady. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if he was walking through time itself, each moment stretching out before him like a path of discovery. The trees parted slightly as he passed, revealing a faint trail that had never been there before, a path that seemed to beckon him deeper, into the heart of the forest. He glanced back toward the flock, their restless movements a reminder of the world he had left behind, but there was no hesitation in his heart. The land called, and he had to follow. With each step, the air grew warmer, the coolness of the night, replaced by a gentle heat that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The shadows that had once surrounded him now receded, parting like a curtain, revealing a hidden world beneath the surface of the one he had always known. The path ahead, wound through ancient trees, their trunks thick with age, their branches tangled in a web of life that stretched toward the sky. The sounds of the valley, once familiar and comforting, faded into the background as the herdsman walked deeper into the heart of the forest. The world around him shifted, as though the very fabric of reality was bending, revealing hidden layers. That had been there all along. He felt a deep connection to the land, as though he was no longer just a man walking upon it, but a part of it, a living, breathing extension of the earth's will. The deeper he walked, the more he understood. This was no ordinary journey. It was a pilgrimage, a test, a calling that he could not deny. The figure that had once seemed so distant now stood beside him, its presence more comforting than threatening. It was not leading him, but walking with him, as though guiding him on a path he had always been meant to walk. The herdsman's mind raced with questions, but they were questions that had no answers, at least not yet. What was this land? What secrets did it hold? And what was the figure that had led him here? But in his heart, he knew that these questions were not for him to answer, not yet. The answers would come when the time was right, when he was ready to understand. For now, the herdsman knew only one thing. The land had called, and he had answered. And now, as he walked further into the forest, he understood that there was no turning back. The path he had chosen had already been laid before him, long before he ever set foot on this land. This was his journey, his fate, and whatever came next, he would face it with the same steady resolve that had guided him for so many years. Figure beside him remained silent, its presence more comforting with every step. The herdsman knew that this was just the beginning, the first step on a journey that would change everything he had ever known. The forest stretched out before him, its secrets hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. And the herdsman, with a steady heart and unwavering resolve, walked deeper into the unknown, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The path was open, and he was no longer just a man. He was part of something much greater, something eternal, something that had always been. The wind howled through the towering trees, bending their ancient trunks with a force that seemed unnatural, as though the earth itself was being twisted by some unseen hand. The herdsman moved forward, his feet sinking into the soft, damp earth. With each step, his breath steady, though the air around him was thick with a strange, oppressive energy. He had reached the heart of the forest, a place where even the wild animals seemed to have abandoned their tracks. The land, once full of life, now felt abandoned, as if a dark shadow had fallen over it, covering the vibrant green and replacing it with a muted gray. The trees here were older, their bark twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like hands, grasping toward the sky. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decaying leaves, a smell that clung to the herdsman's clothes and skin, marking him as one who had ventured too far into the heart of the land. As he walked deeper into the forest, the whispers in the wind grew louder, but they were not the gentle murmurs of the trees or the soft rustle of the grass. No, these whispers were sharper, more insistent, as though the forest itself was trying to communicate something to him, something ancient and powerful. His heart raced, but there was no fear in him. He had long ago learned to trust the land, to listen to its subtle cues, and to walk in harmony with the rhythms of the earth. But this place, this part of the forest, was different. It felt alive, in a way he could not comprehend, as if the very soul of the land had awoken and was now watching him, waiting for something. The path ahead was narrow, winding between the thick trunks of trees that seemed to close in on him, their branches intertwining to form a canopy so dense that it blocked out the moonlight, leaving the forest floor bathed in an eerie twilight. The herdsman paused for a moment, taking a deep breath as he looked around. There was no sound here, no birds calling, no rustling leaves. The silence was deafening. It was as though the world itself had stopped, holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The figure that had followed him remained at his side, though now its presence was more felt than seen. Its shape flickered in and out of the shadows, its form shifting with the wind, yet always there, like a distant memory or a half-forgotten dream. It did not speak, but the herdsman could feel its gaze upon him, its unspoken words pressing against the back of his mind. He had come to understand that this figure was not a person, but something more, a guardian, a watcher of the land. Its purpose was to guide him, to lead him to this moment, though the herdsman did not yet know why. He had walked these hills for years, tending to his flock, and yet this was a journey unlike any he had undertaken before. He was not just a herdsman anymore. He was a part of the land itself, connected to it in ways that defied understanding. As he moved forward, the forest seemed to shift around him, the trees parting as if to allow him passage. It was not a path that was visible to the naked eye, but one that only the heart could follow. The air grew thicker, warmer, and with each step, the herdsman felt a growing pressure in his chest, a sense of urgency that he could not explain. The figure beside him urged him on, its presence more insistent now, its shape more solid as if it was drawing closer, its energy merging with his own. The wind picked up, its howls turning into a chorus of voices, each one speaking in a language the herdsman could not understand. It was as though the wind itself was speaking in tongues, but the words were lost to him, their meaning hidden behind a veil of time. And then, in an instant, the world seemed to stop. The wind died down, the trees fell silent, and for a moment, there was no sound, no movement. The forest stood still, as if holding its breath. In the distance, a faint glow appeared, soft at first, but growing brighter with every passing second. It was a light that seemed to pulse with an energy that a herdsman could feel deep within his bones. It was a beacon, a call, and as it grew brighter, the herdsman's heart began to race, his steps quickening as he moved toward it. The figure beside him did not hesitate. It moved with him, its form now fully solid, its energy blending with his own as they both moved toward the light. The path ahead seemed to open up, the trees parting as though the land itself was welcoming him. As he reached the edge of the clearing, the full force of the light hit him. It was blinding, a pure, white light that filled every corner of the forest, illuminating the trees, the grass, and the air itself. It was as though the very essence of the land had been condensed into this single point of light, and now it was calling him, beckoning him forward. The herdsman stepped forward, his hand outstretched, as though he were reaching for something just beyond his grasp. But as his fingers brushed the edge of the light, a sudden vision overwhelmed him. It was as if the land itself was revealing its secrets, showing him the history of the earth, its rise and fall, its beauty and its sorrow. He saw the ancient creatures that had once walked this land, the first men who had come to settle here, and the battles that had been fought over the land's rich resources. He saw the trees grow, rise and fall, their roots intertwining with the very soul of the earth. And as the vision unfolded, the herdsman understood. He understood that this land was not just a place to live, It was a living, breathing entity, with a soul of its own, a spirit that had watched over the creatures that called it home for millennia. The figure beside him, now fully revealed, was not just a guide, it was the land itself, a manifestation of its spirit, its will. The herdsman had come to this place not by chance, but by fate. He was the chosen one, the one who would carry the land's essence forward into the future, protecting it, nurturing it, and ensuring that its spirit would never fade. The light began to fade, the vision slowly dissolving, but the herdsman was no longer the same. He stood there, rooted in the earth, his heart beating in time with the pulse of the land. The path before him was now clear, the future stretching out before him, full of purpose and meaning. He had been chosen, and now it was his time to lead the land into a new era, to protect its spirit, and to honor the ancient bond that connected him to it. With one final glance at the figure beside him, the herdsman stepped forward into the future, ready to embrace the destiny that awaited him. The forest was quiet once again, the wind settling, the trees standing tall, and the light fading into the distance. But the herdsman knew that the journey had only just begun. The world had shifted, and as the herdsman stepped forward into the unknown, the weight of his purpose settled upon him like an ancient mantle. The air around him was thick with the scent of earth and history, the whispers of the past swirling in the breeze that danced through the ancient trees. Each step he took was a rhythm, a beat in the grand symphony of the land, and with every footfall, the connection to the land deepened, binding him more closely to its spirit. The figure, now fully revealed, walked beside him as it had always done, a quiet presence, its form a manifestation of the land's soul. The forest had become his guide, its paths etched into his memory, its rhythms now in tune with his heartbeat. No longer a mere herdsman, he had become part of the very fabric of the earth, a guardian of the land's timeless spirit. The path stretched out before him, leading through the dense forest that he had once known so well, but now saw with new eyes. The trees that had once seemed merely a backdrop to his daily tasks are now alive with meaning. Each branch, each leaf, each whisper of the wind held stories of the land's history, of its creation, its battles, and its triumphs. The herdsman understood now that he was not just a protector of the animals that once followed him, but a guardian of something much greater. The land itself was alive, its spirit ever-changing, yet constant. The light from the clearing still clung to him, a faint glow around his figure, guiding him forward. It was as though the land had opened its heart to him, revealing the depths of its wisdom, its struggles, and its desires. He was no longer alone on this journey. The very earth beneath his feet, the trees that stretched toward the sky, the animals that roamed the hills, all of them were his companions, and he was theirs. The forest had shifted, its once dark and oppressive weight now lightened by his newfound understanding. The energy that had once pressed in upon him, threatening to overwhelm him with its mystery, had been transformed into something familiar, something comforting. He was part of this world, and it was part of him. As the herdsman walked deeper into the heart of the forest, the land's guardian beside him, he felt the power of the land's history pulse within him. The ancient wisdom of the earth surged through his veins, and he understood his role in the vast web of life. He was the keeper of the stories, the protector of the delicate balance that had been maintained for eons. The future of the land rested on his shoulders, but he no longer felt burdened. Instead, he felt honored, a quiet pride swelling within him. He had been chosen by the land, not because of his strength or his deeds, but because of his ability to listen, to hear the whispers of the earth and to understand them. The path continued to wind through the trees, the herdsman's feet light, his breath steady, his heart in sync with the earth's pulse. The guardian figure moved beside him, never hurrying, always present, but never overbearing. Together, they walked forward into the future, carrying with them the ancient stories and the unbroken bond between man and nature. As the forest began to thin, the herdsman could see the open fields ahead, the rolling hills that had been his home for so long. The flock, his flock, grazed peacefully in the distance, unaware of the transformation their leader had undergone. The animals, though unaware of the spiritual journey their herdsman had just completed, were a part of this sacred circle. They too were guardians of the land, just as he was. He had been their protector, their guide, and now, as he stood on the threshold of a new chapter, they would be his companions in the guardianship of the earth. The journey had not ended. It had only just begun. The herdsman's purpose was clear, his heart full of the knowledge that the land was not something to be possessed, but something to be cared for, cherished, and nurtured. It was not about ownership, but about stewardship. The true power lay not in controlling the land, but in living in harmony with it, listening to its needs, and responding with patience and respect. The winds had shifted, the skies had cleared, and the moon now hung high in the sky, casting a soft glow over the fields. The herdsman paused for a moment, taking in the familiar sight of the valley, the hills stretching out before him. The land was at peace, and so was he. He could feel the heartbeat of the earth beneath his feet, its rhythm in perfect sync with his own. It was as though the earth had spoken, and he had answered. The land had chosen him to be its guardian, and in return, he had chosen to embrace that role with all his heart. In the distance, the light from the clearing still lingered, like a beacon calling him forward. The herdsman knew that his journey would never end. It was a journey of connection, of understanding, and of love. The land, its animals, and its people were all part of the same story, a story that would continue for as long as the earth endured. He stepped forward, his feet light, his heart full of peace. The earth was his home, his protector, and his guide. He was the land's guardian, and the land was his. Together, they would walk forward into the future, carrying with them the wisdom of the past and the promise of a new beginning. The herdsman smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and he took the first step into the future, his path lit by the moon, guided by the light of the land's spirit. It was a journey that would never end, for the earth, like the herdsman, was eternal. And as he walked, he knew that he was not alone. The earth, its creatures, and its guardian were all one.